Good morning, everyone. On behalf of the ISO, I'd like to welcome you to the Storage Design and Modeling Stakeholder Working Group call on the topics of outage management, uplift and deb, and SSC management. The issue paper and straw proposal on the outage management, nonlinearity, and SSC clarification was posted on the initiative page way back on March 27th, and we had comments due on the paper at May 9th meeting last Friday. And we've incorporated those comments here. My name is Elena Kopolov-Alford, representing ISO Stakeholder Affairs, and I'll be facilitating the web conference today. I'm joined by Sergio Duenas-Melendez, Storage Sector Manager, Market Policy Development, Dinesh Dasgupta, Policy Developer, Bob Cott, Principal in Operations Policy, and we're going to be having Kun Zhao present and join us as the Market Development Analyst lead this afternoon. And before we get started, just a quick reminder, these materials are available on the Storage Design and Modeling Initiative page. You can get to that page by going to kaiso.com, navigating to the Stakeholder Center tab at the top, selecting Policy Initiatives, and that'll take you to our main initiative landing page. From there, you can navigate to this initiative page, and the latest documents will be up toward the top, and the video recording for this meeting will be there as well 2 or 3 days after this meeting. So a couple housekeeping reminders before we get started. This call is being recorded for informational and convenience purposes only. Any related transcription should not be reprinted without the ISO's permission. The meeting is structured to stimulate dialogue and engage different perspectives, but please keep your comments professional and respectful. And please try to be brief and refrain from repeating what's already been said so we can manage our time efficiently today. To raise your hand and ask a question, make sure you have the participant and chat panels open. They are minimized on the bottom right of WebEx, so you'll have to open both of those up. If you connected to the audio through the computer or use the call me option, you can select the raise hand icon at the bottom of the participant panel. And you can press *3 if you dialed in outside of WebEx, and that'll get you into the question queue. And please, however you raise your hand, please remember to state your name and affiliation before making your comments. You can also use the chat feature, and you can send your questions in the chat to all panelists or to me, and I will share and read those out loud. If you need any technical assistance during the meeting, you can send a chat to the event producer. Today's event producer is Ahmed. So on our agenda for today, after this, I'm going to hand it over to Sergio to go over the overview of the initiative schedule. And then he's going to go over the comments on the outage management issue paper and straw proposal. And then we're going to go over to Sergio and Kun for the uplift and deb and site-centered charging bid mitigation, and then have an open discussion after that. And then we have a presentation from Alva PG&E. And then we're going to take a lunch and come back for the overview of comments on the SSC management and capacity awards, and follow that up with a discussion. So here, I'm going to hand it over to Sergio.
Thank you, Elena, for the introduction and the overview of today. Good morning, everyone. Hope you are doing well. I think it will be valuable to start today's meeting basically acknowledging kind of where we are in the process and providing some updates on how we are expecting to keep advancing on the different topic groups included under this initiative. So first off, wanted to share once more that topic group classification that we've been working with and that we included in the paper posted late March. We've made a couple of small changes here to reflect the topics included in each of these groups, and also to make sure that we are fairly kind of representing some of the additional concerns or issues brought up by stakeholders. So the quick 2 modifications we've done here. The first one is we brought back that SOC management and capacity awards topic under the SOC management group. This basically seeks to be the place, the venue where we'll continue our conversations around properly representing the impacts of the flexible ramping products on state of charge. As you are all aware, we've pursued a modification in the near term that will incorporate a flexible ramp-up FRU to the state of charge constraints in the real-time market. That is something we'll be pursuing this summer, but moving forward beyond summer, this will continue to be the venue where we discuss changes related to that. In the comments, as we'll discuss later today, in the comments that were submitted on this item, there was a significant call for monitoring and reporting on how the changes on this topic will pan out, what they would mean for the system and for the concern we're trying to address. And we'll do part of that monitoring and reporting through here as well, and other venues, as Dinesh will discuss later today. So this topic is basically back in the umbrella. It's shifted, it's morphed a little bit so that it's more focused on modifications beyond summer, but it is it's trying to represent the same challenge that we've been discussing so far. The second modification is under the distribution level and paired resources topic group. Before we had 4 boxes here, now we have a 5th one, being dynamic limits and AS. This is basically kind of one of the topics that we heard from several stakeholders in presentations, comments, where additional clarity or discussion would be helpful. So we included it here since it will be included in our upcoming paper on this topic group, as we'll discuss in the next slide. So basically, other than that, you know, the classification of topics continues, remains as if it was before. The goal of having all of these different groupings is that we can make progress in parallel, and this is how it looks like. Here, I want to focus on 3 things. The first one is you can see that over the next 3 months, I'm not counting May anymore. We're going to the end of May by this Friday. So really within June, July, August, beginning of September, we'll be having, we'll be advancing all of this topic groups through meetings, comments, and postings. So 3 things to call out. The first one is that we are targeting, you know, discussing today on outage management. We'll discuss the comments we received today. Hopefully have some more conversation on some of the trade-offs that were reflected or identified in those comments. And we'll be targeting having a revised straw proposal within a month. The goal really would be to get that as close as we can to consensus, so that way at least some elements here can continue advancing, so beyond the policy process. So that's on outage management. We've heard from several stakeholders that they want us to pivot to start prioritizing matters related to uplift and devs. You know, we definitely appreciate that feedback. So far, I'd say we've been a bit more focused on outage management than SOC management in what's has, evolved this year. But we think, we've created some very solid basis as well to start discussing a bit more in detail the topics related to uplift and dev. So the goal in the next 3-4 months will be to focus on that, at least in a significant share of our of each meeting we have scheduled, so as to drive towards a straw proposal by September. If we keep that schedule, we achieve this, having a straw proposal by September, I think that will put us on the track to have more meaningful resolution of this topic group in the first half of next year. So that's really part of the goal that we are kind of thinking of when we're thinking of September straw proposal. Kind of means November revised straw proposal, and maybe January, February draft final, etc. So I want to share that. There's a lot of moving pieces, and we want your feedback. So that's also why we've kind of limited it for the next 3-4 months in this table. But that's really the plan on that piece of uplift. And some of the feedback we got last Friday has asked us to kind of show that plan a bit longer term, and we'll incorporate that into our upcoming paper. So now on state of charge management, you can see here that it's the only topic group where we do not have a posting scheduled for in the next 3-4 months. Really, the goal here, I think, will be to use the stakeholder meetings as a venue for both monitoring and reporting of the near-term modification we've been discussing, and that the ISO is ready to implement in the coming weeks, and also use this venue to further the discussion of future modifications or alternatives. In the specific context of the issue regarding FRP and state of charge, it is likely that we'll need further coordination with other initiatives and work at the ISO, but that's not the sole element of this topic group, of course. So under this umbrella of SOC management, we'll keep discussing the merits of system state of charge and state of charge bidding concepts as well. There was a couple of comments last Friday urging us to kind of do a review of the state of those alternatives as well, and I think that will be a good starting point as well beyond the reporting and monitoring on the FRP piece. So in state of charge management, these are probably the topics that will need that will benefit the most from the holistic conversation and the lessons we get from this summer. So at this time, we're not scoping in a posting for the next 3-4 months, but that's sort of the plan under this group. And then finally, we have the distribution level and paired resources. We are working to have our discussion paper on this group posted by the end of this week. And in that discussion paper, we're basically taking inventory of the challenges shared by the ISO and by stakeholders through the previous meetings, and describing the challenges, the issues as we see them, and what are some of the principles and goals that we want to keep in mind as we further refine this problem statement and work through potential solutions moving forward. So we'll have that discussion paper end of this week or early next week as the latest, and then we'll have a good opportunity, a good time for folks to review and later on get comments. There is a lot going on at the ISO. The schedule of this initiative since March has shifted in reaction to a lot that is happening at the ISO, and we want to make sure that our pace of work allows for stakeholders to meaningfully engage with this content. And that's really why we are planning to do the postings in this pacing, so that folks have sufficient time to absorb, to think about it, to produce their comments and give us their feedback. And that way we can continue making progress in parallel, both us as staff and all of you as stakeholders as well. So I'll pause here to see if there's any questions or feedback on this, and happy to take any comments in general.
Sergio, I'm not seeing any hands at the moment.
Okay, well, ideally, that means that we've represented the competing interests and ideas of everyone in their comments here. Okay, let's move on then to the next topic. And obviously, if you have any thoughts on this later on, please feel free to reach out, and we'll obviously have a section on the comments dedicated to this in case you have any particular feedback. So the first substantial item of the agenda for today is about the comments we got on our outage management paper and straw proposal. We got these comments last Friday. We received so far 11 sets of comments, and I believe that a couple more will come through in today or the coming days. So obviously those are not reflected here, but in general, I think that there are very clear themes and trends in the comments. And so I wanted to kind of provide an overview of these comments by the three different topics that we talk about in the paper: outage management, nonlinearity, and SOC clarification and estimation. I'll go over each of the topics, providing some summary overview of the stakeholders' positions, and also mentioning some of the additional questions or thoughts that we might need to grapple with as we move forward on these topics, particularly on the subject of nonlinearity. I think it would be ideal if we have some conversation or reaction on the different positions. So let's start with the modifications to OMS, the outage management system. In our paper, we note that there are 5 or 6 things that stakeholders wanted us to address through a non-policy IT project to bolster or enhance the OMS that we have in use today. In our paper, we mentioned that we would be focusing on 4 of those improvements. The 2 that are not included in that kind of hit list are the saving of prior values from prior outage cards when an update is being submitted. That is not in the top list of priorities, since it's something that would be addressed by this challenge of overlapping outage cards. So by addressing another challenge, we basically are able to sort that one out. The other one that was not included in this list of 4 improvements that we outlined in the paper is the automatic acceptance of updates to forced outage cards. So in the comments, we really saw very broad support for our proposed approach here, but we did see a couple of, let's say, requests on how to, whether we can provide additional information and also additional information from stakeholders on the challenges that they face. So we saw, broad support for focusing on the overlapping outage card challenge. It's very clear from looking at stakeholder comments that it would be very valuable to have some form of some ability or some certainty that if there are overlapping values, the most restrictive value is the one that would kind of have a cascading effect. It would impact the other values and be the one considered during those overlapping periods. In addition, some stakeholders noted that it has been challenging today when submitting outages, either through a third or party platform that is linked to the OMS or directly. That has been challenging to properly reflect the combined impacts to availability and load max values. So we got some detailed feedback from a couple of stakeholders on how this looks on their end. The next steps based on these comments will be to reach out. We'll reach out to some of these stakeholders to better record, reflect in the upcoming version as well of the paper some of these challenges, and as well include in the paper or detail how the improvements we're thinking of could address or mitigate these challenges. So that's part of our next steps based on this feedback. We got other feedback, basically more requests for a little bit more of information. That is also something we want to add in our upcoming revision to this paper. So there are 3 areas where more information could be useful from the perspective of stakeholders. First, what are, in general, the resources expected to be available for this modification, particularly in the context of heavy lifts regarding DAME and EDAM implementation. This is a complex question. I think what would be a bit more practical as well to share in the context of the revised paper will be to have some better estimates on the potential lift or timeline of some of these enhancements that I think will provide stakeholders a better picture of the path ahead. In a similar vein, we also got questions or requests for a bit more detail on the work associated or the time associated with the enhancement that we had mentioned would be a little bit more complex, and therefore we are not suggesting we undertake it at this time, which is automatically accepting updates to forced outage cards. We can definitely bolster that in the upcoming revision of the paper, providing a bit more information on the challenges associated with this and the potential timeline for update. I think that will provide some transparency to stakeholders, but also allow stakeholders to, think about their own challenges and think about the trade-off, right, that these different timelines or lifts represent. So we definitely welcome having a bit more discussion and detail on that in the revised paper. And finally, as I have alluded to before, we got some requests to lay out the calendar looking forward beyond the next 5 months-ish. Even if, we end up revising or adjusting that, that will give folks a good sense of what to expect on the kind of staggered resolution of the different topics and topic groups we've been working on. Finally, on this section, we got a pretty timely comment. I'd say that before we move forward or we move this in the direction of, working on this through the non-policy IT-related enhancements or any given PRR modifications, anything like that, that we vet, test some of these changes, all of these changes, and corroborate their interaction with CIRA and settlements, and discuss some of that in this venue prior to moving all of those topics away from the umbrella of this initiative. I think, that is aligned with our goals of having this be the policy venue for it. And, we take this feedback to heart and will work in alignment with it. The next part is really about nonlinearity, and that might be the one where we got the most diverse feedback. But before I go there, I'd like to take a little pause and see if there's any questions about the comments or feedback we got on OMS enhancements. And again, if this is a summary, right? If there's anything else that your organization would like to point out or underscore for others too, that might have not been reflected in the summary, this would be a good time. So I'll pause here for a second.
Okay. We have a hand from John.
Hi, this is Don Trethewey from the California Energy Storage Alliance. Thanks for the presentation and overview, Sergio. One question I have is, on the OMS area, there was basically 6 enhancements, 4 of which it seemed that CAISO was supporting and were something that could be addressed near term. And I believe the other 2 items were also supported, just that they would take a longer time to implement, and that it wouldn't be something we could get immediately. Is that summary accurate, that CAISO supported all 6 elements? It's just that 2 couldn't be implemented on the same timeline as the other 4?
I would say that we've supported working on all of these elements. The 2 that were not in that list of 4, one of them is not that we don't support it, but it's really that it's an issue that will be addressed by one that we are supporting. And that is basically save the data in prior cards for updates. That's an issue that it's, from our perspective, kind of duplicative of allow us to have overlapping cards, because it's really the same challenge. So that one, I wouldn't say it's something that will be working on more in the longer term because it's really more so addressed by the supporting overlapping cards. The other one that we hadn't included in the list of 4 improvements was automatic acceptance of forced outage updates. And that is definitely one that, we also support working on, but will take, it's likely going to be a larger list. But yeah, that does not mean that we are, immediately saying this will not happen. Just as it doesn't mean that the 4 improvements are trivial, right? Those ones will also take some time, but it's easier they represent a smaller lift altogether than doing immediately the automatic acceptance. So hopefully that works. That helps.
It does. So that sounds to me, I would argue we're pretty close to a draft final proposal on the OMS related items. Given that one item you believe is actually addressed by the 4 that you can do, and we have an implementation timeline that's different between the automatic acceptance and the previous 4.
Yeah, I largely agree with you. On this piece, I think it's probably the piece we have the most alignment within the paper. I do want to note that some of the comments we got were, for example, hey, before we move this out of this initiative, let's make sure that we've done and had the discussions around how this will interact with other systems. So because of that, I'm definitely in alignment with you that we're getting very close on this item, but we do want to keep this venue at least for another, meeting or two to talk about these issues so that when we get to another version, revision of it, people feel more comfortable moving forward or moving forward beyond the policy initiative on this. Okay, well, I'm not seeing another hand at this time. So
there's one comment in the chat, Sergio.
Oh, okay.
You want to? Can I read that out for you from Sean Hernandez? I'm not familiar with the phrase outage linked to CAISO. Is that the same as submitted? I might have a concern about this proposed default in the last line, but I'm not sure.
Okay, yes, this is a good question. This basically is referring to the circumstance where an SE is using software to convey their outages that is not directly the OMS system, but they're using like another software that is linked to the OMS system to be able to represent those outages. This is part of those kind of challenges that are a bit more specific, that would like to reach out, converse with some of these participants that submitted these comments last Friday, so as to properly reflect that in our upcoming revision of the paper. But really, basically, the point of that comment in this slide is if we are submitting an outage, maybe the default value should be that availability and load max are not available. That doesn't mean you can change it, but that might be better to have as a default, given the concerns that or issues that some stakeholders have faced. This is not that different from feedback we've heard before. The specific or new part is that this specific stakeholder is using another software in between them and the OMS, let's say. So hopefully that helps, Sean. Okay. Let's see. Are there any other hands? I don't believe so. So let's talk about nonlinearity now. This is the the area where I think we got the most diverse comments. It was pretty interesting reviewing the comments because you can see that everyone is getting more and more comfortable with let's pursue something in the near term and then move to a more durable solution. But there's been a bit of a shift in the currents of what would be that near-term solution. So, most stakeholders did support the use of outage cards to reflect fallback. Of these stakeholders, I would say that about three-quarters believe that it would be more reasonable to use the nature of work of technical limitations not in the market model. Now, as we have discussed before, this is a nature of work that would make the outage RAIM exempt. It would be exempt from the resource adequacy availability incentive mechanism. The other quarter of stakeholders, of those that support using the outage cards, do believe that the nature of work used by storage in these circumstances should not be RAIM exempt. Across the board, though, all of these stakeholders agree that this is not a long-term solution and that other market enhancements should be pursued to address nonlinearity, like updating the master file to have new fields and then modifying the market to recognize those fields and operate in tune with them, or developing some form of state of charge-based bidding. So everyone agrees that even if we pick RAIM or non-RAIM, this is not the end-all solution. And I would say a majority of stakeholders also urged us to shift gears quickly after we kind of settled this near-term debate, to shift gears quickly into a longer-term solution. So let's dig a little bit deeper on the comments around whether the outage should be or not, the nature of work should be or not one that is RAIM exempt. So we got several arguments from the stakeholders that believe that the technical limitations not in market model nature of work is the just one to use in this circumstance. Lots of the comments mentioned that this is a technical limitation known for this technology, that it cannot be fully eliminated. It could only be minimized at great expense as well. They've underscored that nonlinearity is not so different from, ramping in conventional generators or transitions for multi-stage generators, noting that none of the latter two are penalized via RAIM. I think a particularly robust argument shared here was that, it would be a bit contradictory in our efforts to seek to apply RAIM to nonlinearity in the interim when we are looking to reflect this in the market model later on. So I think that is an important factor to consider, as well as the reality that at this point we are discussing modifications, updates, very significant revisions to the RAIM mechanism in general in other venues at the ISO. So, in general, kind of thinking how this fits with RAIM and then modifying that it could be creating more complexity for us, for stakeholders, and the market ahead of significant changes later on. And I think another important argument that was shared was that, lots of people have mentioned, well, the ISO mentioned in the paper that RAIM exposure could incent some augmentation or reaction to make sure that these resources are sufficiently built out and available to meet their RA responsibilities and obligations. But some of the comments noted, it is not without its challenges to respond to this exposure. Challenges that are obviously, physical, logistical, but also that might in turn have an impact on the costs of these resources moving forward, particularly given, the need for affordability in this industry and state currently. And while a lot of folks on the other end, on the other side of, they want this card to be subject to RAIM, I've noted that it could be challenging to assess whether the use of a RAIM exempt card is legitimate or not. They also underscored that usage of the card could be monitored, just like, for example, as we'll talk in a couple slides, the use of the dynamic limit tool could be monitored as well. On the other end, I think the argument of folks that would prefer the nature of work to not be RAIM exempt had largely remained the same, noting that these penalties may provide incentives for existing and new resources to augment or consider means to mitigate the negative impact of fallback moving forward. As I mentioned, looking at the other comments, while this could be the case, it's really related to the timing, the ability, the opportunity to augment, to respond to that. That's one. Two, the challenges related to pricing that could stem from this. While in the future, contracting entities could consider this in their evaluation of offers. In the near term, this probably will entail, if they react by augmenting or modifying their system in any way, that probably would entail some costs and some modification of that. And finally, the reality that, as we are discussing in the RA venues at the ISO, RAIM, the penalty itself might not have sufficient teeth to incent that behavior. Part of why we're contemplating modifications to RAIM in other venues. So these are kind of the arguments on why we should use either of the cards. In general, I'd say that next steps from our perspective, we'll be looking very closely at this argument, particularly of the comparability of nonlinearity to ramping and moving from one stage to the other on an MSG. We would not want the direction that we're taking here to be inconsistent with what is applied or generally to other technologies. So we'll definitely take that feedback to heart and expand on that in our next revision of the paper too. A note in what effects, if any, it has on our proposed near-term direction. Now, another idea that had been floated was don't use outages. outages are not equipped to deal with this. It would be better if we just extend the use of dynamic limits to storage resources to reflect this nonlinearity. Initially, we had heard some concerns from stakeholders about the extension of this functionality to NGRs in general. And in the comments we received on Friday, we got a little bit more information on why this would be desirable, but also some more comments that reflect that this would still require a lot of discussion in general. So first, stakeholders that support this alternative told us in their comments that they're concerned that outage cards might not be a feasible solution given the time frame associated with this option. And they asked in their comments for us to provide kind of an example timeline of how an SC would go from identifying to communicating the outage being accepted, and everything being reflected. That is a piece that we can incorporate in our paper in our next revision. A stakeholder that previously did not support this idea noted that if there are some modifications, there are some clarifications as well, they would feel more comfortable with this proposal. In particular, the addition to the tariff of explicit language that specifies the acceptable use of dynamic limits for storage, the incorporation of data to the master file so that we can properly monitor the use of dynamic limits, and the establishment of a rule that if a resource is using the dynamic limit, it would be ineligible for VCR for the intervals in which that dynamic limit impacts the resource's dispatch, any intervals nearby, and if it is too complex to determine which intervals might have been affected, then the whole day. This obviously already puts the consideration of dynamic limits from a quick fix to something that would immediately require more data, looking at the master file, more discussion, looking at what we might include in the tariff and the VCR implications of it, and also I'd say it also creates the challenge of now we need to think about how this interacts with VCR before we fully discuss how we're going to change VCR. So I just want to, with this comment, underscore that while a viable path that we will consider and we will report and include in our paper, this might create some added conversation that we need to have and added burden. And finally, and perhaps more crucially, given the discussion on the last slide, it is not immediately clear what relationship to RAIM we'd have if we extend the use of dynamic limits. The fact that dynamic limits today do not have an interaction with RAIM is because dynamic limits are only available to use by hybrid resources, which are RAIM exempt. So this effectively means that if we would want to pursue this path, we would still need to have a robust conversation on the RAIM implications of it, which I think some stakeholders thought we could sidestep or we would not need to engage with materially if we chose this path, but it would not leave us with that resolved. It would actually require a bit more discussion. So those are the feedback in general we got on fallback. I will pause here to see if there's any questions or reactions, anything to add as well from stakeholders.
We have a comment in the chat. Actually, I think we have, from Drew Gray. One comment for Sergio on page 13.
Yeah, we can address that one. Let's go to the hands first, and then
okay, let's go to Alva.
Answer in the chat. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
You're really quiet, Alva. Are you able to move a little closer?
Yeah, sometimes the sound comes up as I'm talking too, so it may be
that sounds better. Yeah.
Artifact of the. This is Alva Svoboda, PG&E. I had just sort of a thought on the previous slide first. One thought would be that is it really appropriate to be both of the comments on incentives are certainly correct, but would it not be more appropriate for CAISO to establish performance definitions that would clarify what is the correct, both in terms of grandfathering and in terms of future development, what's the correct way for a battery to be set up to address whatever the CAISO's concerns would be. In other words, if it's legitimate to allow the energy to be declared, even though some of it is less accessible, then that should be made explicit in terms of the performance requirements. Or if in the future you want to insist that all capacity should be accessible, then that should be defined external to the question of rain penalties. So that's one comment I had on that. I also wanted to just check, and because I'm a bit ignorant on this, but is rain the declaration that something is subject to rain penalties, is that entirely unilaterally the CAISO's determination? I mean, in terms of its own internal decision-making processes, or does it require any kind of confirmation from any other entity, any other regulatory entity?
So I'll address both the comment and the question in the same answer, And really the answer is like the first part of clarifying all of this expectation of performance would definitely require alignment beyond just the ISO, as well, not only as alignment, but also careful consideration of what are the given differences between the local regulatory authorities' established parameters and ours. The second part, which is just RAIM, and that is within the ISO's tariff and authority. So the design of RAIM, the applicability of it, that is something that we can revise and review, and that we've been working on through that RA initiative. And ultimately, the goal, which is also pretty important here, I didn't mention it, but a small number of comments mentioned, hey, maybe we should just create a new RAIM exempt nature of work. That is neither of those, but of the ones we've discussed, but that effectively is RAIM exempt. And in that RA effort, what we're working on, the ISO is thinking of a successor mechanism to RAIM, MURA. So that does fall within our authority. Any, though, clarification or further definition of what we would expect the assets to to be designed to achieve or to meet, though that would require some coordination. Yeah.
Yeah, but I do think that's a direction to look at, though, in terms of that. Essentially, you've got participants who've brought resources into the mix based on poorly defined expectations, and the usual solution for that is going to involve some form of grandfathering, and some of this needs to be addressed more in terms of that process you're describing, rather than trying to do it incrementally through these this whole concept of using incentives in the short term to get that kind of behavior out of new contracts or new resources, I think is very suspect in my opinion. So I just wanted to express that. And then could you go to the next slide? I think I had one point on the next one, but no, I think it was pretty much the same thing. I think it was sort of the issue you raised with the comparison of storage and hybrids is exactly in the same category of consideration. So thank you. Just wanted to make that point.
Yeah, thank you all. We'll definitely take that into account and reflect those subtleties in more detail in our revision of the paper. Chris? I think we can hear you now.
Okay, very good. This is Chris Devin with TerraGen. So just wanted to thank the ISO for reviewing the comments quickly. It looks like, there may be some possibility of some good changes in here on this issue. And then I did just want to comment on the note that, some of the stakeholders want to have the discussion about RAIN when using dynamic limits, since they're not applicable right now, being only used for hybrids, which are not exposed to RAIN. So, I think just our position, in reaction to that quickly would just be to say that it appears, that for the use of this issue, the other principles that we expressed in our comments and several others did as well of, this is more of a technical limitation rather than like an actual outage, mechanical or electrical outage on the equipment, seems to lend itself to being, more appropriately not exposed to RAIN, or RAIN exemption would be appropriate. So, I think that would be just something to consider. Obviously, of course, you should have the discussion and get feedback, but I think, seems pretty straightforward that using dynamic limits for the purpose of foldback would probably be appropriate to not apply RAIN, at least in our view, in our position. So just wanted to provide that input. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Chris. Yeah, I definitely can see the argument both ways. The challenging piece on this, I think, will be that we are, seeking to, when I say we, I mean us and stakeholders, we're seeking to move a bit fast on this, and this will definitely be a conversation that we have to have, and we'll reflect that in the paper as well. Finally, as Yelena mentioned, there was this one comment on the chat noting that this slide, the second sub-bullet that says, requires new master file data, etc., that referring to an expected modified ramp rate could be inaccurate in this circumstance. I appreciate the comment. This was seeking to reflect exactly what stakeholders wrote down, but you are correct. The correct way of phrasing this would have been, and the Pmax or Pmin curve that would be affected in those regions as a function of state of charge. That is more accurate as to the specific effects of nonlinearity. But I think in general, what the comment is seeking to convey is we need the data of what to expect from you. Without that, it will be pretty difficult to sanity check what the dynamic limits are doing or trying to convey. Sorry. I have one final slide here on this subject regarding the clarifications for what refers to availability within the state of charge definition. We didn't get an awful lot of comments about specifically the changes to the SOC estimation, but this slide is trying to kind of summarize what we have on the state of charge definition and just one or two about the calculation. I think there is broad support to further clarify what available means within the lexical SOC definition included in Appendix A of the tariff. A couple, I think 3 or 4 stakeholders offered their own angle on what available should mean or how should it be interpreted. And I put together this sentence by looking at those comments, at those 3, 4 folks that offered some language. And I think in general, what we're expecting is that what is conveyed through telemetry would be energy that is available for either market or exceptional dispatches without restriction at the time the information is relayed. I'm putting this sentence here. This is not the specific language that any one stakeholder suggested. It's a mishmash of what different stakeholders suggested, but I think it captures the gist of what we wanted to get to. So I really appreciate those that offered some thoughts on that definition and welcome any reactions to this sentence. Stakeholders also requested a bit more information on the impacts of further detailing or clarifying that definition of available. How would this impact other systems or any downstream market operations? And we also saw a couple of comments that noted, we support this effort, we support this clarification, but let's not be overly restrictive on how we might calculate the state of charge, because in some cases, the SC or the market participant might not have full, decision making or control over how this is calculated and provided. So that will be something to bear in mind. I think in general, what we are thinking about the state of charge calculation is not to give a formula and tell you all this is how it needs to be calculated, but more so to have a common understanding of the factors that need to be taken into account, the intent of the value that is conveyed, its assumption of availability, and the various forms of limitations or characteristics that could affect that value and that we would like the telemetry to consider. So we're definitely not trying to shoot to be over prescriptive, but just to have, a common understanding and expectation of it. This is the last slide on the comments. So I'll pause here, and I think Alba has a question.
Can you hear me? Or am I?
Yes.
Tim?
We can hear you.
Great, thanks. This is Alva from PG&E again. I thought with the came to mind when listening to Chris. I don't know if it was directly related to what he was saying, but one thing I'd like to get is some real clarity on what. So, does the CAISO consider resources to be unavailable in any other case where they are still able to bid between PMIN and PMAX? And what is actually happening is the ramp rate has changed and is not being captured by CAISO. Is there any other resource type where if you're able to bid from PMIN to PMAX and you're actually able to be dispatched, but the ramp rate is not correct due to the operating range, that you would be considered to be on an outage that would potentially leave you exposed to rain?
Yeah, that is a great question, Alva, and that kind of takes me to this argument of nonlinearity is not about the energy being unavailable. It's available at this lower rate, let's say,
Right.
or at a lower rate. So this is the kind of argument that we really want to, in detail, look at the comparables of other dispatchable generators and their treatment. My understanding is that there are not other dispatchable resources for which we do that. So
Right.
that, to me, creates the concern of would a solution other than using the technical limitations not in the market model, would a solution other than that be potentially, treating this technology in a different way than we would treat other comparable ones?
That makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, I appreciate that you underscoring that in the comments and the comments that underscore this from stakeholders, because this is an area where we want to be obviously always careful, compliant with the tariff, and we don't want our near-term decision making to be contradictory with our long-term policy goal here. So we'll have to look both at the precedent, what is done with other dispatchable generators, and also consider our end goal in the longer term, so as to align the solution here.
And I think that but it certainly argues for a rain exemption, because it's not the same kind of outage that you're generally, making those charges for on other resources.
Mm-hmm.
The other element of this, I think, is that, at the same time that you're in this foldback range, you're close enough to your state of charge limits that CAISO may not be able to dispatch you to PMAX, but that's because of where the market has taken you in terms of state of charge. And the market participant has no obligation to tell you, obviously I can't do PMAX anymore because I've got less than PMAX energy in the battery based on how you use the battery. So I think you also need to keep that limitation out of the consideration of whether there should be considered an outage when you're in that range.
Yes. Thank you for that, Alvin. We'll add much more detail on that in our discussion too. And, overall, we know that we had this meeting today. We're targeting for the next revision of the paper in a month, and then we'll have another meeting after we post that. So in the meantime, in the coming weeks, I'll definitely be doing some, trying to have some conversations with some of the stakeholders about their comments too, so that we can get on the same page, include a similar, include a good conversation on this in the paper, and make sure that we're in alignment and there's no surprises when we get there.
Great.
So thanks for the feedback.
Thank you, Sergio.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other hands, and I am behind on time. So let's keep going. And of course, if anyone here has any other thoughts on the slides that we've covered, reach out to me and we'll happily have a conversation about it. So Uplift and Deb, we had the opportunity to talk about this in our current effort and in the prior efforts, the VCR-related modifications. And, in prior conversations, we heard from stakeholders that they wanted more data on the instances of mitigation that storage assets might face. In particular, we heard an interest in looking at information on charging mitigation. Charging mitigation from here on out refers to the downward revision of charging bits due to market power mitigation. These downward revisions of charging bits might make it harder for the resource to charge and fulfill future awards or schedules. And this could include not only reductions in charging, but also flipping, let's say, from charging to discharging. Because remember, from our end, our reduction in charging, if it takes you into the discharge or not, we're just going to see that as incremental energy, right? So this is what we're referring to when we're talking about charging mitigation. Before we talk about the data, I wanted to talk a little bit about why this occurs, right? So when you look at these examples, when you look at at this data, this information, when you look at this, you need to remember, this is a consequence of the need for monotonically non-decreasing bit curves. Essentially, we have this axiom that bits have to be monotonically non-decreasing. So you can imagine, and by monotonically non-decreasing, I really mean they need to look like steps going up, to put it in the most colloquial of ways. So if you look at a monotonically non-decreasing bit curve, the steps going up as the x-axis, the megawatt value goes up. If you look at a monotonically non-decreasing bit, and then that resource is subject to mitigation, any part of the bit curve, any segment of the bit curve that falls above the default energy bid and the competitive LMP will be mitigated to the higher of either of those values, be it a charging or a discharging segment. So I want to underscore that, this is a consequence of an axiom of how bits need to look. It's not something exclusively, related to charging. It's something that actually occurs because the mitigation itself needs to comply with this axiomatic need of monotonicity. So when you look at this, keep that in the back of your mind too. And, as we have this conversation and look at the data, we might have some other questions or thoughts. At the end, please let us know. This will definitely inform how we keep thinking about this issue. This issue, we wanted to share the information with you and talk about it because it will be an important consideration as we think about redesigning Uplift, because we've heard from a lot of stakeholders that, if any instance definitely merits it, it's mitigation, right? So we want to have a clear kind of understanding and picture of its frequency, its magnitude, its impact. I would also say, before we look at the data, I would also say that, this information, this situation of mitigation of charging bits and its impacts, we have several tools available to scheduling coordinators to mitigate the challenges associated with it. A key one is the end of hour state of charge parameter. You know, if you are concerned that your asset might not reach a specific state of charge range by a given interval, this is perhaps, you know, the tool that is the best tool available to you to ensure that. And finally, before we go into the data, you know, when you look at this too, consider a little bit the interplay with the DEB, right? Any enhancements to the default energy bit of storage, any modification that allows us to better reflect that DEB of storage would also have an impact on the data we're about to see. So it's not just something, while it is something that happens out of the axiomatic need for monotonically non-decreasing bits, it can be addressed or mitigated through other means. So with that, I'll pause here, and I'll turn it over to my colleague, Qing Zhao. And if you want, Qing, you can move the slides if someone makes you a presenter. So maybe let's do that so you can control the slides as well.
Thank you, Sergio. Let me try that.
It worked.
Yay, nice. Okay, thank you, Sergio, for setting the stage. This is Quinn from Market Performance and Advanced Analytics. Let me just turn on the video. So Sergio set the stage well. We're going to look at some data on the mitigation on the charging side. Before we dive into the data, here are some considerations in this analysis. All the data you're going to see is from RTD mitigation, that's 5-minute market. Since we do mitigations, and the real-time mitigation happens in FMM and RTD, since FMM results are financially binding but only operationally advisory, only RTD schedules have direct implications into the future hours. So this is the first step into the analysis. We said that RTD mitigation impacts the battery state of charge, which in turn has dispatch implications for later hours of the day. So all the data you're going to see is from RTD. Then the mitigation on the charging side, as Sergio has already talked about, the battery bid charging side may be adjusted down when mitigation triggers. Depends on the competitive LMP, the DEB, and the submitted bid, right? This potentially could lead the units to charge less than originally intended. Under certain circumstances, these results may not be ideal. And it's a consequence of the current logic to maintain the monotonicity of the bid curve after mitigation. So we're going to look at the scale and impact when this happens. We begin with the distribution of overall mitigation frequency at the resource level over the past year. This is all the resources in CAISO. Since the WEIM batteries, almost all the WEIM batteries have are base scheduled. So we looked at the CAISO resource as the representation here. The data was ranging from April 1st, 2024 to end of March 31st, 2025. So that's 1 year period. On this chart, the y-axis is percentage of LESRs, and the x-axis is the percentage of RTD intervals where the resource bids were mitigated in the study period. Each bar represents the frequency of that bin. So the bin width is 1%, right exclusive. So the first bin will say that that's the percentage of resources having charging side mitigation frequency of 1% or less. And the second bin says that's the percentage of resources having charging side mitigation 1% to up to 2%, et cetera. From this chart, we see that more than 60% of the resources had mitigation frequency below 1%. That says for the most resources, mitigation on the charging side was infrequent. There is a smaller subset of observations. Those resources experienced higher rates. The highest was up to 11.01%. That's the far right bar, just below 12%. Okay, so this one is a different representation. This slide shows the monthly distribution of the numbers of resources mitigated on the charging side per 5-minute RTD interval. So in other words, this is how many resources were mitigated on the charging side together in one 5-minute interval for each data point. And x-axis has 12 months of the year, y-axis has number of the batteries. So majority of the time, the number of LESRs mitigated on the charging side was really close to 0. We saw all the median numbers were zeros, and the 75 percentiles were close to 0, or all less than 5 for all months. We did see some consistent outliers for each of the months. The higher values occurred during the summer months of the year. Last year, July, August, and probably September. The highest values were up to 60 or close to 60 resources were mitigated in the same market on this hot summer day in July and August 2024. So I think I forgot one detail if I didn't mention it. So mitigation on the charging side here really means that the charging side bid was adjusted down, if I didn't clarify that. So there's one layer of the resource marked for mitigation, and the second layer is the actual bid adjustment. So not all the resources that are subject to mitigation were mitigated. It's up to the bid and the DAB and then competitive LMP interplay. Okay, this is a heat map. This breaks down the percentage of LESRs mitigated on the charging side by both months. The months are done on the y-axis and by hours of the day on the x-axis, 1 through 24. The color code goes from 100% in pink down to dark blue in 50%, 50% in dark blue, and then down to 0% in white. So if you see a really pale colored, close to white colored tile, that means a percentage of resources mitigated on the charging side was really low, close to 0 in that hour for that month. We saw that the highest percentage of resources mitigated on the charging side occurred mostly during the midday hours, typically somewhere between the mid to late morning till the early mid-afternoon-ish for all months. So that's the darker colors tiles on this chart. The peak months were the summer months again. We're looking at the July, August through September 2024. That's a 3-month period that had the darkest blues or blue to purple-ish. So the highest percentages reached up to about 58% during these hours. Okay, now I'm gonna switch gears a little bit to zoom into a subset of that. Yes, I see a hand. Can we take the question?
Yeah, let's go to Don.
Hi, thanks for the data. Can we look at the previous slide?
Sure.
So in the September, August, and July timeframe, we're saying that in the middle of the day, which is when we would expect the storage resources to be charging to be ready for the afternoon and evening peak, that we're seeing mitigation of half of the storage fleet. Is that a correct interpretation?
Close. So yes, we're seeing this happens more for the midday hours when the solar supply is up and then storage community wants to charge. This statistic is really as a percentage of resources that had any interval mitigated on the charging side for that hour of the month. So that 58% or over half of the community does not happen all the time for everyone. It's anyone had any mitigation for that month of that hour of the month, it's going to be marked here as a positive data point. Does it make sense?
Okay, so if I was a storage resource and an hour ending 12, I was mitigated once in the month, that would be a count of 1. And if I was another storage resources and I was mitigated every single day at hour ending 12, that would be a 1 as well.
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions? Seeing none. Okay, let me move on to the next set. So it's the same statistics in a zoomed in fashion. We further zoomed into the subset of charging side mitigations that potentially had a solution impact, or in other words, here I'm talking about incremental upward dispatch when that happens. Right, so the heat map does not have a third dimension that goes into how many resources were mitigated by month and by hour, because we need 3 axes to do that. This one shows the frequency on the resource level over the 1-year period. Yeah, so this is sort of a counterfactual. This was done under certain assumptions. So the data was taken from the snapshot of RTD binding interval results. And it was assumed that the resources would have been able to move while the LMP stayed the same. That's assumption. And then it was assumed that the resources had enough state of charge to move within the bit range without hitting SOC limit. So under those assumptions, we did this counterfactual and estimated who in the mitigated set would have a solution impact. And looking at these numbers, again, it's the same metric from the first slide. Percentage of batteries, LESRs on the y-axis, and percentage of charging side mitigation with incremental dispatch on the x-axis. Here we are looking at less frequent than previous triggering events. So 94% of the resources had less than 1% of frequency. That's almost everyone. And a few resources had up to 3.3% frequency. That's the far right bar that had a non-zero value. And this indicating an occasional but some meaningful impact for certain observations on the resource level. Same metric, but with a zoomed in version. We're counting the number of batteries, getting charging side mitigation with incremental upward dispatch. And in here, we're saying zeros across all months for up to 75 percentiles. So 75 percentiles of monthly observations were all zeros. That means we had really no impact from all these cases. But we did see some non-zero outliers up to 2023-ish. So that's the highest number of resources getting mitigated on the charging side with incremental upward dispatch in the RTD at the same time. That occurred also during the summer months, July, August, and September. And again, this is the same heat map looking at the subset of cases where that mitigation created incremental upward dispatch. We see all the other colors become lighter. That just means that we are looking at a less frequent event triggering under this definition, and the highest percentages occurred, remained the solar hours of the summer months. So you see the slightly darker teal blue over the midday hours from something around 9-10, hour ending 9-10 to hour ending 16-17-ish. And it's midday hours for across all months, but summer months were the peak. And with that, this is the final slide of the deck. Under all these assumptions, when charging side mitigation resulted in incremental upward dispatch, we estimated the state of charge depletion on the resource level. We did that by comparing the original curve versus original submitted bid curve versus LMP to get a counterfactual dispatch and then use that to compare with the actual RTD dispatch. That delta megawatt is converted to megawatt hour and summed up for the hour. So each data point here is in resource level, is by resource level, by trade date and hour for the whole year. We see that across all the 24 hours, the really deep SOC depletion remained low, was close to zero for most cases. But we also did see that higher values up to more than 200 megawatt hour per resource state of charge depletion happen for certain hours of the day. And those cases are potentially non-trivial on the resource level again. And some of these estimates may be overestimating depending on the resource situation, because I assumed state of charge limits were not hit and resource could move from a charging PMIN, say the resource bid into the market from -50 to +50. And when LMP is in the right range, I would assume the delta incremental dispatch goes from -50 to +50. That generates a 100 megawatt delta. So that data itself, counterfactual itself, may be a little overestimating, but this is the overall picture we wanted to share. And yes, questions?
We had a first hand from Alva, and then we'll go to Drew. Alva, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Kun. This is very interesting. I'm a little confused about whether this addresses the issue of charging not being possible, or in other words, that the bid prevents what would otherwise have been the opportunity to charge in the middle of the day, even if it doesn't flip to discharge. Is that case being considered here as well?
Yes, so this summarizes all the cases of charging less. So,
okay.
Right, so charging less here could mean I was going to charge up to -50 megawatts of charging, and then now I'm at -30. That's a 20 megawatt incremental upward dispatch. Or another case would be I would have been at -50 and now I'm flipped to +50. Then I create a 100 megawatt delta.
Okay,
so
great.
both cases will be included here.
Thank you very much. I hadn't understood that, so thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thanks. And it looks like Drew lowered their hand. Drew, if you still have a question, you can raise your hand back up and we'll call on you. Let's go to Mike McGuffin.
Hi,
Mike, go
sorry,
ahead.
this is Mike McGuffin from CES. Alva asked my question, so thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we have one hand from Balakrishna, and then we'll go to Don after that.
Yeah, can you guys hear
It
me?
looks like Bala's. Oh, yes, we can.
Yeah. So can bids
I'm sorry, can you go
ever
ahead
be
and introduce yourself first, and then you can dive
Yeah,
into
my
your
name is
question.
Balu Shastri. I'm from Southern California, Edison. Have we ever seen instances where bids are mitigated up? So, we always think of bids getting mitigated from, say $1,000 to $50 or whatever. But let's just say there's a bunch of solar and every battery bids -150. I mean, would the CAISO theoretically or practically mitigate the bid up to, $0 or whatever? Like, has that happened, or can that theoretically happen?
That's a good question. No, we don't mitigate up. So if the bid is lower than the DAB or competitive LMP, then the bid curve is not changed in the final, even if the resource may be marked as subject to mitigation. So no, we don't mitigate up.
Let's go to Don.
Trethewey with CISA. Thanks again for the data. One thing I was wondering is there a way to look at, for instance, the correlation that a resource's charging bid has been mitigated, and then we see, very high prices in the, the peak, evening peak? Because I think it'd be interesting to see if there is I think in most instances, it's probably, it's mitigated and doesn't cause a problem. But I think on super tight and high priced days, that this phenomenon could be a problem, because you'd want to see all of the storage resources charging up earlier in the day, consistent with their bid, and they might put an extremely high offer price in for that. And just to see if in instances where then there's a power balance constraint, how many resources actually were mitigated in that scenario?
Thank you. Yeah, that's a good question. So, right, this study, we're taking the snapshot of the market as a counterfactual, so we're not able to rerun the whole market, especially as a rolling parallel, production-like market counterfactual study. So we're not able to put a price tag or a dollar impact on the mitigation for the same time intervals. We did another study last year on the mitigation topic. We looked at battery mitigation, both charging and discharging sides, and looked at BCR impact with the mitigation. And that gave some information and indication how the dollar impact might look like through the BCR perspective. But yeah, for now, I don't have the data how the hours of the day impact would have been when the mitigation for RNing 14 happened or did not happen. But yeah, that's a good question.
Okay, let's go to Mike McGuffin.
Hi, Mike McGuffin from CES again. I do think looking at the bid cost recovery impact is a bit misleading. There are a lot of factors that can, skew those numbers. Was there any more in-depth analysis on some of the outlier cases here with some of the units that were frequently mitigated to see, what percentage, basically looking at those, it seems like a fairly small number of units that are frequently mitigated.
Yes, so we did see low frequency overall. There were certain cases where they had higher rates than the other ones. We didn't look into the details, but can you clarify what specifically are you looking for?
Well, I mean, I
those
think the
cases?
numbers are skewed just by the data set. If you're attempting to charge for 5 hours in a day, you're mitigated for 2 of those. You know you're effectively losing half your charging capability, um, uh, and you know you obviously have to try to rebid to pick up that SOC in later hours, which is sometimes not possible. So just curious if if the way that the data was compiled, if it you know sort of minimized that impact.
Yeah, so on this slide we're looking at right now, we're trying to quantify the impact on through the state of charge scale. We don't have other representations as of now. We can think of more detailed impact on the resource, maybe resource specific, because all of these outliers we're seeing probably will have a better case than all the zeros we see for the majority of the data point. But yes, so on the resource level, we do, for certain cases, we do see non-trivial or significant impact for certain hours of the day.
Okay, yeah, I do think it's helpful. It would be helpful to look at, you know, a certain subset of units that are frequently mitigated, because it is, you know, difficult to manage, and there is, you know, a cost. I mean, I think looking at the entire resource set, you know, definitely skews the results, and it's a meaningful impact for those resources that are frequently mitigated. And I think, you know, the analysis that you're showing here should or could be bifurcated to show, because I think it conflates a bit. I understand what you did, but I think looking at the impact of mitigation, drawing down SOC earlier hours, and meaning it's no longer available across the peak, versus mitigation that's just preventing units from charging. So I think there's 2 issues that are at play here that need to be looked at.
Yeah, thank you for the suggestion. We can take it back and think about that.
Okay, good. I'm not seeing any other hands, and nothing in the chat.
Sounds good. I'll give it back to you, Sergio.
Great. Thank you for that, Gwen, and thank you all for the the questions. We now had some time dedicated for open discussion. So I'll give folks a minute, a little brief time to see if there's any other feedback, questions, concerns, requests, suggestions that you might have. And if not, we'll move to our stakeholder presentation section, where we'll have PG&E present today. And before we do that, and while people maybe raise their hands to take advantage of the open discussion, I wanted to, you know, reiterate our call for all of you to, you know, consider these meetings as a space where you can share your ideas, your concerns, your thoughts, and get feedback from the community. You know, when we're looking at I'm going a little bit back to show the schedule. When we're looking at the schedule, this will give you a good sense of which meeting is an opportunity to present on what. We will always reiterate that through our notices and doing some targeted outreach as well. But yeah, take a look at the schedule. If there's any topics that are of particular importance to you, to your organization, let us know. We'll definitely make sure that you have the time to present and that you have the time to get feedback from all stakeholders here. So I'm not seeing any other hands at this point. Maybe what we could do is let's take advantage of having made good time now, and let's take a small break prior to PG&E's presentation. Maybe we can come back. Let's say 11. We take a quick bio break, get some coffee, and we can get going with PG&E's presentation at 11. In the meantime, are we set to change the presentations here, Elena?
Yeah, we're ready. We'll do that during the break.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, we'll be back at 11.
I'm all set here too, so that'll be good. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you.
All right. Okay, we're going to come back from break. Alva, you have presenting rights. Do you want to go ahead and get started?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. PG&E appreciates the invitation to present. I will say that, and I'm just leaving the video on for just a moment, just so you see that I'm actually here, but these are a little bit rough around the edges. We didn't spend a lot of time putting these together, and they do not represent the official position of the company. So in some cases, they're just my own thoughts. In some cases, they're thoughts that have been discussed with others, but they're more meant to provoke discussion than they are to be any kind of definitive proposal. So I'm going to stop the video and move on to the next slide. And just for in case you're not familiar with PG&E's interests in the storage arena, we do have one significant battery at Elkhorn, which is about to come online after a period of outage. We do have many storage contracts for RA where we have no or limited operational visibility, but they are significant to us as contributors to system reliability. And then in complement to the battery portfolio, of course, we have a diverse supply portfolio, which we want to see used in a least cost fashion. So that's another way in which we're interested in this topic. Finally, as a load serving entity, we're interested in what storage contributes to system reliability, how it affects prices, how it affects our least cost dispatch and our costs to our customers. And last but not least, any allocations of costs to our load due to features of the market that are outside of the market design itself. So the key point and the reason for the title of the presentation is and this is to assert and not to be definitive about it, but and I'll just say for now, my belief is that SOC is or state of charge is a physical parameter really only in the actual real-time dispatch process. When it's based on telemetry and OMS, it is used to determine the feasibility of energy and flex procurement binding real-time instructions. In any other context, it isn't really a physical parameter. And as an example, and quite obviously, when SOC is used by a battery operator in its bids day ahead, it has no necessary relation to physical reality. There's an overall correspondence because the SOC has to be within the limits in the master file. And there's an expectation that the solution day ahead will generally drive SOC in real time, but there's no necessary correspondence. When you put in an initial SOC in day ahead, it is not a given that the actual initial SOC, when you get to real time, will have it will be anywhere close to that value. And of course, this is part of the reason for the CAISOs using the attenuation factors for cases where batteries have regulation to take into account that the state of charge may move a long way from where its day-ahead schedules appear to place it. I would also assert that likewise, SOC is a market parameter when it's used by CAISO in calculations that are done in non-binding intervals. These constraints that are imposed by SOC in the market model don't really represent even a forecast, but you could argue that at best they represent a forecast of where SOC may be in the real-time market in later intervals. But they are certainly used by CAISO to manage, to some extent, its own uncertainty about where SOC will be, but they are not in themselves binding either physically or financially. And the hypothesis that is behind this presentation is that when we confuse market SOC and treat it as a physical SOC, there's the possibility that the markets are or may in the future lead to uneconomic or overly constrained CAISO market solutions, where we are pretending that a market parameter is a physical parameter. And in general, the more appropriate way to think about market parameters is that when there's a deviation, there's a deviation cost that has to be paid by somebody, whether it's the market participant or other participants in the market. I'm going to, again, as I said, this was meant to be, opening a discussion. So I do not have visibility on hands, but I would ask Elena, maybe if there are hands, to just let me know and before I go on to any, because the purpose is just to get discussion going here.
Yeah, I can call out hands maybe at the end of a slide or in between a pause. I'm not seeing any hands right now and no questions in the chat. Oh, I just got a hand. Don Trethewey, go ahead.
Hi, Alva. Don Trethewey from CISA. I'll take you up on your offer.
Great.
I think that this sort of your hypothesis, wouldn't that apply? I think that applies to any use limited resource outside of RTD, as well as, I always view, the day ahead market is, the IFM is purely a financial market in my mind. It should position you where, close to real time if there's convergence between the day ahead and real time prices. But, the real, I agree with the real physical operational instruction, dispatch, all of that is off of RTD. And so anything prior to the one binding 5-minute RTD interval is, I think, what you're defining as a market SOC versus a physical SOC. And
That's right.
And wouldn't you say that same logic would apply to thermal resources or any other use limited resource as well?
Well,
those are really physical. Day ahead, they're operational characteristics of the resource, but the rubber doesn't hit the road until RTD.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think the nature of how use limits are implemented in real time would be the thing to think about there, and it's a kind of a different direction to think about. I think, and I'm not ready to do any presentation on that, but I think for example, with thermal units, there's the use limit. We'd have to understand how it's actually going to be enforced in either the 15-minute market or real time in order to make the analogy. Similarly with hydro, I've got a vague sense of how the CAISO markets try to enforce the day-ahead energy limits in real time, but I don't have the details in my mind of how that's done to say whether it's really comparable or not. I think in general, because both of those limits are just generally a lot looser, it's less likely that the CAISO's market optimization will constrain the unit's operations to the same degree that it does with batteries. I think this is one of the sort of the problems with the battery model in a sense, or it's also a benefit, is that it really is trying to get at something that is that the battery can perform to more or less exactly, and where it is, as we've heard in some of the discussions, state of charge is being treated as equivalent to unit output in terms of what is expected of the battery in performance. And at the same time, the CAISO has some form of control over that, or it optimizes to that at a very high level of tightness. So definitely something to look further at, though, is how much of an analogy there is between batteries and other resource types.
And then my final comment would be, I think if we agree that RTD is where the rubber hits the road, RTD is where the physical parameters are correctly, accurately reflected in that 5-minute price, that when we look at pricing in the forward energy markets, we need to ensure that that price formation is close as possible to what actually is going to occur in RTD. And I think that's a little counter to the position you're taking in terms of, do you want to be overly are you overly or uneconomically limiting the CAISO market solutions in the forward procurement, in IFM, for example? But I think it's really important that you still want that price in IFM to be as close as possible to the price formation approach in RTD, because that's what then drives that convergence.
That's a great point. I think you could go in two directions on that. One is to say that real-time prices inherently have some differences due to the phenomena we're talking about here, just the that things happen, and that operators are managing their risk, and that leads to a divergence. The other possibility, which I bring up in a few slides, is you could try to enforce the day-ahead solution or the 15-minute solution much more strictly, and you could and essentially put the liability for all the divergences onto the CAISO. So if the market model is complete enough for that, you could say that we're going to keep consistency except where outside things happen, but not with respect to, if everything stays the same, we're going to have exactly things are going to be exactly what we're anticipating day ahead or in 15-minute market, or even from HASP in real time. Yep. So I think that's kind of the nub of the problem in some ways. Yeah, I mean, yeah. I'm not sure if I agree with that. The convergence of those is the aim of the market, but I think if you want that, there are ways of increasing the convergence between the other markets and the real-time dispatch.
No, and that brings up something interesting. When I was at the CAISO, when we were developing the day-ahead market enhancements, one of the things that the Market Surveillance Committee kept pushing on was that if you clear the day-ahead market and there is no change between the day-ahead market and your 5-minute dispatch, that you should see no deviation settlement. And it was observed that you actually do see a deviation settlement unless you actually do, with the flexible ramping product, unless you do the ramp deviation settlement. And so I think that's why, you know, if you take that logic, you'd want to make sure that the price formation for imbalance reserves with regards to energy opportunity costs is the same as how it would be calculated in RTD. And if it's different, then you can't meet that objective that if nothing changes between day ahead and real time, there shouldn't be any settlement implications.
Great point. And then another topic to definitely put on the, or maybe for you to present on next time around or in some other setting. So I'm certainly not prepared to address that arbitrage between the IR and FRP, but I think that's a great point. I've got a bunch of topics which I may or may not go through fully here, but they're intended to reflect what the discussion about essentially what I've been talking about. So I'll just go through these, and the conclusion is to look at the two models that are possible for storage in the kind of the medium term or the next few years in terms of the development that might happen around SOC management. But I did want to raise our comments about the flexible ramping up and real-time SOC issue as an example of what I was talking about, because there's a question with this calculation of SOC to guarantee deliverability of flexible ramping up, whether that should be looking at non-binding intervals. It's clear to me from the argument that CAISO made, and just common sense, that you know, if you're going to award flexible ramping up, you should be able to, it should be dispatchable as energy, and so it has to satisfy the state of charge constraints. And if it's not, then it's an error and needs to be fixed, and that's what this PRR is doing. But it's doing that, plus it's also imposing constraints based on anticipated FRU awards in future intervals. Now, it's probably not going to make a huge difference, because every 5 minutes and every 15 minutes you roll forward and you get new telemetry. But it's worth thinking about whether that's the correct formulation for what you're trying to address there, and whether non-binding FRP awards should be affecting future SOC and then reflecting back on the binding solution in the market solution. I also wanted to point out PG&E's proposal, and I don't think this is CISA's proposal, but I wanted to acknowledge that CISA came up with the idea in the first place, which is that there needs to be constraints to ensure feasibility to both flex ramp up and flex ramp down. And our twist on that was, I think CISA wanted to treat this as putting these products into the what are called the energy constraints, and our inclination is always to overkill perhaps, but to put it into both of the SOC constraints. So essentially have 4 constraints that would guarantee feasibility of the FRU and FRD awards separately in each direction, and with respect to both the energy awards and then looking at the energy plus the reg energy awards in the intervals of concern. This is really not, we've gone over this, so I don't want to beat a dead horse, but if anybody has any comments on this, certainly a good point to make a comment.
I'll just quickly chime in and say we do have some slides regarding the comments we got through the PRR process and the stakeholder commenting tool around this topic, and Dinesh will go over that after lunch. But I mean, in general, I think that we are I think we now have a shared understanding, the ISO and stakeholders, that any solution on this matter beyond summer would likely need to either create additional constraints or leverage constraints that have been developed as part of DAME to be extended for this goal. So, we're very appreciative of PG&E including that in their comments. I think it would be it offers a good starting point for those discussions. And, in general, when we're thinking about how we want to ensure FRP awards to be able to be met, we are in the present time with what will be going in this summer, we're really taking a bit of a approach that ensures the reservation, let's say, of that SOC, so as to definitely meet those awards. But as we advance with the monitoring and reporting of that, we'll also have some insights on the interactions with other awards and prices. So just wanted to offer that a bit as a preview. And thank you, Alba.
Great, thank you, Sergio. And I will say a lot of these, sort of, we tend, at least I tend to, look for potential flaws. It's not clear that some of these things are all really that material. I think one of the good things about having Kun give the kind of information that you get from actual market data is sometimes it reveals that some concerns are more niche, perhaps. They're not, and that doesn't mean that they shouldn't be dealt with, but it may mean that you have to be, that you shouldn't necessarily, throw out the good in order to get to the perfect. So, but we're just raising thoughts here in this presentation and in our comments. So appreciate that, Sergio.
Thanks, Alba. We don't have any other comments.
Great, thank you. So in terms of day-ahead SOC, just pointing out that day-ahead SOC is validated against the OMS SOC and against the master file, but it is in fact a market parameter controlled by the bidder. It's not really phrased beautifully here, but when I say to what extent should physical SOC drive day-ahead SOC bidding, I'm kind of getting at Don's question there of whether there is it even possible, first of all, and then should a battery operator try to develop a set of bids that will lead to a feasible SOC trajectory that can be exactly matched in real time? Given that half of the stuff that's going on with SOC is being done by CAISO, and I think that's probably the case even if you're not regulating, but certainly if you're offering regulation, it is. Should you be, what sort of obligation should you feel to try to get a physically feasible solution? Not to say that there should be none, but it's not clear what the obligation is. It hasn't really been defined in terms of even the business process, I think. And the extreme model of this would be to say, you do whatever you want with physical SOC, just like you do with with the bid-in SOC, just like you do whatever you want with your energy bids, and there will be a imbalance settlement. And so if you, and just as you can bid in ways that you have no intention of operating, or you would, let's put it this way, you can operate to, but you have no desire to operate to, between day-ahead and real time, the same thing could apply to the SOC bids. That's kind of the nature of the CAISO's day ahead versus real time market is that it's the discipline of the real time market that is supposed to determine the extent to which you use your bid parameters to maximize your revenues in the two markets. If there's perfect convergence, then the incentives, like Don was saying, should be very similar, and there shouldn't be any great divergence between the two markets. If there's a lack of convergence or there's other inconsistencies, then as a battery operator, you should be managing in such a way as to maximize your revenues in the two markets, whatever your assessment is of those two, the opportunities in those two markets. Right now, batteries use a daily minimum and maximum hourly energy availability, along with their dispatch currents when they bid day ahead. And potentially one thought just raised here is potentially that flexibility could even be increased, and batteries could bid an hourly maximum and minimum hourly energy availability in order to give them more control over the results in the day ahead market as far as SOC are concerned, which then translate into the extent of the deviations in the real time market. So this is a pretty contentious point. If people would like to throw some brickbats at it, or otherwise just say this isn't relevant, it'd be great before we go to the next slide.
Nope, no hands at this time.
Okay, I've thrown down the gauntlet, but maybe people will send me an email or something. This is just not sure that this is exactly relevant to the topic, but one question that I have is why the target SOC values are not used to manage state of charge. And my understanding is the main reason for that is because of the loss of bit cost recovery. And if that's the case, then and this goes to the question of bit cost recovery in general, perhaps there should be a parallel effort along with looking at uplift of addressing whether the CAISO decisions that are driving the losses are correct decisions, because potentially batteries believe that CAISO is doing the wrong thing, and therefore they deserve bid cost recovery when those incorrect decisions are being made. I'm personally, and again, this is definitely not PG&E's official perspective, I'm personally sympathetic to DMM's arguments at this point that maybe batteries should be very restricted in terms of receiving BCR at all. But with the provision that they should be able to be indifferent to constraining hourly SOC in real time to reflect their preferred operating ranges. And again, my belief was that RA requires a full set of bids from PMax to PMin, but it doesn't make assumptions about SOC, and that therefore batteries might be perfectly happy with being able to put those limits on SOC if they were not being disqualified from, or they weren't concerned about being disqualified from providing RA. And the DMM's question about I think one of the fundamental questions here is, are SOC limits more analogous to startup and minimum load constraints or to self-scheduling? They're obviously not identical to either, but if they're more analogous to startup and minimum load constraints, then the argument that you need to really work on bid cost recovery and make it right has a lot of weight. If SOC limits, both those that are set by the the batteries and those that are set by the CAISO are more analogous to self-scheduling, although not identical, then it's not clear that bid cost recovery is going to be able to capture the evaluation of which part of the costs should be recoverable, which part of the costs really shouldn't be recoverable. Any questions about this one, or thoughts about this one, I should say, because I don't think there's any questions.
Yeah. We've got a hand from Don.
Don.
Don Trethewey from CISA again. So, you know, I take sort of the opposite view on DMM. I think that where on the BCR issue is, but I don't think we're that far off, actually. I think, and you hit on the key, is that the storage resources should get BCR whenever it's the CAISO modeling limitations or the multi-interval optimization, something that where the CAISO is making the decision on the dispatch that results in an out of merit and the need for BCR. So we should, I'm more like, let's find those instances and then for any other instance, you shouldn't have the BCR. So, and it's really more of taking, rather than saying don't allow, there should be no BCR, I'm saying there should be BCR, but we should find the scenarios where it's appropriate, which is, it's not, the reason the resource lost money is not because of a decision or a bid or a management choice that they made, but one that was forced onto them by the CAISO decision.
Right.
And being able to buy, and then the question then becomes is, if the CAISO is causing it, then, and it gets BCR, do we want to find a way to give more discretion to the storage operator so that you can shift that BCR responsibility off of the CAISO to the market, to the storage operator?
I think that's pretty close to my position, actually. Yeah. So in a sense, if you're willing to take the risk on, you can forego the BCR, and if you're not, and the CAISO can't, and the CAISO is making decisions that are adverse to you, then you should be entitled to BCR. And the other element of that is there an examination of those decisions to see whether whether those decisions are themselves problematic. If there's if the bid cost recovery is due to, I mean, with startup and minimum load, bid cost recovery is due to an optimal unit commitment solution.
Right.
If bid cost recovery with regard to storage is not due to an optimal solution, then that should be considered a separate problem and it should be addressed, right?
Agreed. I think your startup and min load example is a perfect scenario. You know, if you had a very fast start resource that could be started up in RTPD, it's going to be started up economically, just like the storage schedules are going to be economic over the entire horizon. And if things change and the decision to commit that resource was wrong, it should get BCR. Just like if the decision was to hold or dispatch storage in a certain way, that too would be eligible for BCR when those mistakes are made.
Yeah.
And they're not, and mistakes is probably the wrong word. It's just system conditions changed. And remember, the whole intent of bid cost recovery is to further incentivize following your dispatch instruction, rather than having, uninstructed deviation penalties. You simply say there's no incentive for you not to follow your dispatch because we're going to make you whole in the event that system conditions change.
Right. Great points. So now just talk briefly about, sorry, do you have more, Don?
This is Sergio. Can I chime in really quickly?
Oh, yeah, sure.
I didn't see any other hands, so
okay.
Wanted to jump in. So I wanted to comment a little bit on the last bullet. I see SOC limits. Well, first of all, I'd say when I'm thinking about the question, I'm thinking about the end of hour state of charge parameter, right? And like why people don't use that. People, Generally don't use it a lot because of this VCR question. Should we think of them closer to startup, minimum load, or self-schedules? And to me, they're definitely closer to a self-schedule, but they're actually even more flexible, both for the ISO, for operators, and for the SE, right? When you submit a self-schedule, you're essentially telling us, do this regardless of the price. You're a price taker fully. Now, when you submit an end-of-hour state of charge, a biddable parameter in that given hour, we are able, the ISO is able to allow for, economic dispatch to really optimize based on the bids to the degree possible, up until there might need to be something done to force the outcome by the end of that hour, right? But it still allows for, in the intervals that are provided, that are possible to focus on economic dispatch, you also get that benefit. So it is, as I see it, it's kind of a fraction, a part of what self-scheduling is. Self-scheduling will give you the certainty of an output for a period of time. This will give you the certainty of where you end up in, plus the flexibility of still being able to be, to the degree possible, economically dispatched to get there. In that sense, I think the question might need to be split. There are some state of charge limits that are self-imposed. There are others that are found through the market optimization process, and that might merit, action from the operator that could lead to a situation of bid cost recovery. But if it is self-imposed and even more flexible than self-schedule, I see it closer to kind of where it is today, which is it's not covered under that umbrella of BCR. Just wanted to offer those 2 cents. Yeah.
I think that's a great point, because I've thought about these. Target state of charge actually means, if anybody's on the call who doesn't know, it means you set a maximum and a minimum state of charge limit for the end of the hour. And so clearly there are values that you could put in there that would be broad enough that it doesn't seem right that you should lose bid cost recovery. In fact, those could be related to some of the issues that Sergio was bringing up earlier about just representing, changes in conditions, or of course, as an example, that you're close to hitting a foldback constraint. So I think you really captured it beautifully. The thoughts that I've also had about what's different between pure self-scheduling and the target state of charge. But the question is there ever going to be a way to sort of distinguish between the actions that have to be taken by the CAISO in real time because the optimization is going to try to do what it can economically to meet the target state of charge. And it's not going to be necessarily clear whether when something is uneconomic with respect to the bids, whether that's due to those constraints or to something else. And I think if it were possible to, in a perfect world, if you could distinguish the uneconomic actions of CAISO, kind of the way Dawn was talking about it, in a sense, perfectly from those that are caused by market participants, then you could say you're still entitled to bid cost recovery for what CAISO decided to, or needed to do, but you don't get it for the actions that had to be taken because of what you wanted to do. So I think that's kind of a holy grail that we'll probably never be able to achieve.
And we've got a hand from Drew as well.
Hi,
Drew, go ahead.
this is Drew Gray with Rev Renewables. I just wanted to provide some color on that first bullet, the end of our SOC, and why batteries don't use it. I mean, I can only speak for us, of course, but I would say that BCR does not weigh in that decision whatsoever. It's mostly driven by the realization of the impact of those limits, and the realization ends up behaving more like a self-schedule whenever you get into that space. And with a 75-minute bid window before the start of the hour, it drives poor outcomes most of the time at poor pricing, and so it's
Okay,
it's just not useful. It's better to be economic unless you want to pay high prices.
so you've got bids within the hour, but generally there's going to be uneconomic dispatch due to the target states of charge. Is that kind of the?
And probably more so relative to what may occur in the future or behind it, just that the level of price due to that, since it often will, the MIO doesn't capture that, or doesn't capture forward stuff like that very well. And
Really interesting. Thank you, Drew.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I kind of almost have the opposite intuition that, with target state of charge, you could set yourself up perfectly for future periods where if you thought that you needed to be somewhere at some level in a future hour, and so that you get more control rather than less. But it sounds like you're saying in practice, the outcomes, certainly as you in your experience, they haven't been positive, basically. And so you essentially respond to seeing what happens when you use this, and with all of the effects that, like you say, of the multi-interval optimization, you see the results not being helpful.
yeah, but I will say periods that it is helpful is, when we going into an outage or something where we need some min or max level of SOC that's
Right.
different. Like it's useful for those type situations.
Right. Got it.
Just not economics.
Thank you.
Okay, and we have a hand from Chris Evans.
Oh, okay. Chris.
Yeah. Hey, Alva. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
Yeah, very good. Chris Devon from TerraGen. So, yeah, I just thought I'd weigh in here as well. I think, we tend to agree with Rev and what Drew was describing and the use of that tool. We don't use it because it presents more of an economic liability as opposed to a tool that, gives us flexibility that we can rely on because of the multi-interval optimization outcomes. I think we see that it's really hard to see when the actual prices materialize. The MIO is using the advisory pricing, and then those constraints, extra layers of constraints, and having ancillary services. All the rules around those bidding requirements now just is super complex to even try to actually use that in an optimal manner. So I think we come from a little bit of a different position on the BCR discussion, where I think we would say a baseline should be that we are always eligible for BCR. And I think I agree with kind of the way that Don and CISA have described their position. And then, I think you said that it's maybe like a holy grail to try to be able to differentiate when the MIO does it versus when the actions of the resource operator somehow cause it, deviation or something. And I just think it's really hard to. So, it seems that it would be kind of unfair to say that the, storage owners' bids are the ones that are at fault for these outcomes, when the case of MIO is looking at advisory pricing and all these constraints are happening behind the scenes within the market, and then we don't have other resources that are similarly being excluded from BCR because of their bids. So I think some of the stakeholders' positions where they said, oh, well, these outcomes are the direct result of the bids. Therefore, it's the resource owner's decision, and they should be ineligible for BCR. I just think that position is kind of oversimplifying it, and it just really isn't that straightforward. So, I guess I would say we would like to see eligibility continue as a kind of a baseline, and then, these other outcomes that happen, if there's a deviation for something that happens because of an outage or, other actions by that are actually clearly the direct result of the SC, that's one thing, but just to kind of make a blanket rule that it should be ineligible, kind of like what we've seen, just because we saw like high levels of BCR outcomes. It seems that that's a problem market, and the result of these MIO outcomes that we've seen occurring due to all these layers of complex constraints that the CAISO has in the market, not the direct result of the storage operators like ourselves. So just wanted to chime in here. I think it's a really good discussion. Thanks for bringing this forward, and appreciate your thoughtfulness on these slides and in the stakeholder efforts here. Thanks, Alva.
Thank you, Chris. I think, a couple of things that come up there are, one, are there better tools or better optimization tools that would make it possible for are these issues of complexity just insurmountable, or are there, is there some way to like start the analysis and get to a way of, formulating that problem that is manageable by the batteries. So that's one thought I would have with respect to what you were saying. But other than that, I think this is really another part of the discussion that Sergio will be leading. So I don't want to go down this path too much further. But I think I take your points in terms of actual experience of operating batteries that, essentially, market participant kind of knows when they're at fault, and they know when CAISO's at fault, and it's just hard to make the case sometimes. But that conviction is nevertheless a strong one. Actually, these yeah.
Could I chime in here real quick?
Yeah.
I think this conversation has been very interesting, and I have a couple of thoughts to offer. So first, I hear both from Chris and Drew that from their perspective, the fact that using the end-of-hour state of charge tool excludes those hours from BCR is not really driving their decision to not use that tool.
Right.
But then I hear that the actual driver of that decision is that they see some economic risk, and that could materialize in a way that they see as the potential for loss. So to me, that sounds really that they would like insurance for that loss, and BCR is that insurance. So it seems to me that they are still related. The decision to not use something is still related to the BCR conversation. And I also believe that, the outcome of getting to a target state of charge range could result or could require some uneconomic dispatch. That is precisely why those hours are excluded from BCR if you do use this. So I would encourage maybe market participants to think a bit about how to represent that position, because it's a little bit confusing to me that it might not be related to BCR from their perspective, but the challenge is the risk, and BCR is that insurance, so I think it's still related. My other comment is about what Chris mentioned of, it might not be reasonable to think that the bids of storage resources, what those bids do are quote unquote like directly under the influence of the SC. And that because of that, if it's the result of bids, then they shouldn't get BCR. I think Chris kind of frames that a little bit as, well, we wouldn't do the same for other assets. And here I would say, I generally agree with that, but that's because what storage is doing with their bids is unique. It's not what other assets are doing with their bids. What storage is doing with their bids is to manage their state of charge. This is recognized from the 2 prior filings we've done on BCR. It's acknowledged by FERC. The bids of storage resources are not exclusively a representation of marginal cost. They're a tool via which stakeholder scheduling coordinators are able to manage their state of charge, right? So when we think about what are some of the tools they might have to influence outcomes, this is perhaps the primary tool that they have to influence outcomes, right? And
Right.
those bids are now we can develop more, that doesn't mean that's where it ends, but today that is the primary way. So the fact that those might drive an outcome, I do think it's different than how we might think about when a conventional resource bids and what they're conveying with that bid. They're not conveying the exact same set of costs and risks than a storage resource, a conventional resource, right? So I do think that's a bit an area where we'll need more discussion because it does seem to me that there's a bit of a disconnect between I hear the want for more tools, more SOC management directly from the SC, but at the same time, from others, I also hear more assurance that more instances, even related to the bids, would be covered by viscous recovery, and we'll have to try to marry those ideas together in a way that actually fits. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting because I think the MSC has made some comments, I don't know about the DMM maybe as well, but they sort of imply that batteries are perfectly well able to manage their state of charge. That came up with the original discussion about the ASSOC constraints, and we were talking about why should people lose bid cost recovery when CAISO is driving your state of charge to a maximum level. And the argument that CAISO didn't make this argument, but MSC made the argument that you're capable of controlling your state of charge, and therefore if you're losing bid cost recovery in those cases, it's because you chose to. And I think one of the things is the landscape that's being drawn here by hearing from Drew and Chris as well as Don is that there's the question of what are the limits of the information you have and how good are the tools you have to do this are definitely part of this problem as well, because and it may be partly because of the lack of information from like Chris was saying, the stuff that's coming out of the multi-interval optimization is not helpful maybe, and so then it's impossible to make a rational economic decision. I mean, I find it hard to believe that that's really the case if you had enough software to do this, but maybe it's just too expensive to get the software to do it. It's like we're in the age of machine learning. So how is it that we're not able to, kind of almost automatically have batteries do exactly the right thing to maximize their revenues in real time? Clearly it's not, but it's interesting to try to figure out whether that's market design or just there are limits to how much energy you want to put into optimizing your actions in the real-time market. It's very hard to do. Anyway,
We do have a hand from Paul as well.
okay.
Okay, Paul.
Paul Warhatch from Public Advocates Office at the CPUC. So I want to thank Alva for kind of bringing and integrating these elements of BCR related to MOO and state of charge and warranted BCR. I think I just want to make the point that while eliminating all BCR may be simplifying things, I think giving BCR maintaining BCR eligibility is ignoring the problem. And clearly there's a middle state here. It's complex. We've all along supported the idea of giving greater ability to manage state of charge through state of charge bidding, which I see Alva is going to get to next. But you just want to kind of continue on this middle ground, and I appreciate Alva's points in kind of integrating all these ideas, and just happy again to see Baycroft's recovery being considered here. Seeing it's kind of fallen off the agenda for a while, and look forward to work over the summer and coming straw proposal in September. But thanks.
Yeah, likewise. I'm looking forward to. I think you're right. There has to be a middle ground, and the analysis has to be careful. But I think you teed it up well. I'll just briefly.
We have a hand from. Do you want to go to the next hand? We have a response, I think, from Adam Swadley.
Oh, okay, of course, Adam Swadley.
Yep. Hi, this is Adam Swadley from DMM. I just thanks everyone for the discussion. I think there's a lot of good points being brought up here. I really just wanted to comment on one line that's in the middle of the slide here, just to ensure that it's not taken out of context without full discussion. So there's a line here: consider DMM's arguments that batteries should not receive BCR at all, or when SOC constraints aren't binding. I think if I'm understanding the slide right, we're talking here in the discussion of min or max SOC limits, but I just want to, I guess, make the point more generally that, the position we've stated in the past, and I think is still kind of the way I would phrase it, is that it's not that it's not that we've said firmly we think there should never be BCR for batteries under any circumstance. I think the issue that we've raised before, and that I think is being highlighted again today, is that BCR rules as we know them today, as they exist, they weren't designed for batteries. They weren't designed to consider the way batteries operate. They were designed for traditional generators, right? So I think the point that we have emphasized before, and that we continue to emphasize, is that we're saying that the default should be that there's no battery BCR until there are specific cases identified where it makes sense, right? And so I think that's what the later part of this policy initiative was intended to do, was to identify those circumstances where BCR should be appropriate. But I guess the main point is that taking rules that were designed for traditional generators and saying, oh, well, there's these scenarios where under those rules, batteries would get BCR, and so we should continue to apply that as the default. I think that's where we've taken issue in the past. But that's a different thing than saying batteries should never get BCR, that the answer is just to completely eliminate it, because I don't necessarily think that's the case either. It's about being deliberate in designing BCR rules for batteries to only provide it in the cases that I think actually make sense. I just wanted to provide that point of clarification. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. I was using you as a straw man, I think, in my drawing this up yesterday, and certainly an argument would certainly be a word that shouldn't have been used here. I think, as you put it, if you did make an argument, it was a much subtler one than what I presented here. So thank you for the clarification. Can I go forward, Yelena?
Yeah, that was the last of our hands. Thank you for checking.
Okay, and let me know if we're going to just run out of time. This is probably 5 minutes for each of these last two slides. I don't think I need to go beyond but I do want to present on both of these The just sort of teeing this up, and really Sergio is going to be the master of this when he redoes the presentation on the SOC bidding model. And I will say, by the way, I'm setting aside, we had a proposal for SOC bidding. It's always a possibility that that could come up again, but I've assumed from the lack of, the deafening silence, that there's no reason to continue down that road. People consider the idea of adding products to be overly complex, and it's not clear that it solved the problem. So what I'm sticking with here when I say the SOC bidding model is the model that was previously presented by Sergio, and is actually most clearly presented at the FERC conference last summer. And I hope it'll be represented for stakeholders. But basically, batteries using this model would bid to charge or discharge based on their modeled SOC in a particular interval. And so what are the clear advantages of this? Well, one is that it allows differential bidding of batteries when they approach or enter their foldback ranges, or any other range that they want to treat differently from what would otherwise be a single uniform bid on the battery. Secondly, this model is essentially robust enough to capture long duration energy storage, because it doesn't assume that there's a state of charge that's being used in a single day. A battery can provide a starting state of charge, and it can provide bids around that starting state of charge that represent its wherever its state of charge might be able to go within a day. And so if you have a 100-hour battery, you can bid for what it can do 24 hours in the charge direction and 24 hours in the discharge direction, and you are able to bid a 100-hour battery into the market, and the CAISO is able to optimally use that battery. So essentially, it's very suited to the potential that long duration energy storage becomes more important. And I am of the belief that if we're still on the trajectory to a decarbonized grid in California, then we're going to have long duration energy storage to deal with the non-solar periods. And so those things match well. The other thing about the model that was presented, which I think is important, is that it has an explicit switch between charge and discharge, unlike the current NGR model. Now that has disadvantages as well as advantages. Again, it's very suited for long duration energy storage, and for the new storage types that might actually have a switch. But it does mean that it's either you can't change state within a single 5-minute, within a single 15-minute period, you can't change state because the states are determined in the FMM, or you have to allow for changes of state in the 5-minute market, which is a change that is not presently in the RTD process. There's no commitment variables in the RTD process. So basically I had some questions, and I barely even understand what I was writing, or which SOC constraint would be. Oh, has to do with the two SOC constraints. So the question is, and so I guess this is, if you're using this format of bid in real time, how do you evaluate these bids in real time, where the SOC that is being bid, I mean, I guess in terms of the binding interval, you can always evaluate the SOC constraint properly because you're using telemetry, and so you can evaluate what's the bid in that interval. But when you go into the advisory intervals and where you've got ancillary services and flex and so forth, it's questionable whether you have a single SOC that you can use to determine what the bid is in the future intervals in the real-time market processes. So that's one question. It could even come up in the day ahead potentially because of the procurement of IR and the constraints that are imposed by the imbalance reserves. And even just the interpretation of imbalance reserves is a complication with respect to this model. Another question that comes up with is should there be any expected consistency between day ahead and real-time bids in this format? I would say probably not. And one of the things that's going to happen out of being, for those who want to use this model, it gets into all these questions of complexity that Chris was addressing. But I think you really do need, machine learning or something of that sort, because you have to really change your storage dependent bids based on where you are and based on what's been happening and based on where you plan to be. You want those bids to be different in every hour, probably, because that's going to be your mode of managing state of charge. To what Paul was saying, this becomes a way of more explicitly managing state of charge, but that requires in real time that you actively be modifying those bids and potentially modifying them within a very limited range. In other words, maybe your bids for this model are changing to represent 1 hour up and 1 hour down in every hour, so that you can accurately capture all of the different preferences that you have as you move through time in the day. So there are complications with this model, and I'm looking forward to Sergio's next iteration on it. I think it's a very promising model, but it does have some complications, at least with respect to how the market is today. Do you want to respond to my assertions, Sergio? I don't want to leave you mute there.
No, I mean, in general, I agree with a lot of the benefits you've outlined here. The model's ability to integrate all their different types of storage, different durations of storage. I think there will be some questions with that we need to grapple with, mainly around its interaction with other planned modifications to the market, the big ones they need, etc. In general, though, I would add that I think this is a very promising model that could address a lot of the challenges we've been thinking about and discussing. In that sense, I also would urge stakeholders to kind of think of the implied opportunity cost of pursuing fixes to some of these issues now versus focusing on developing a model that can address them a bit later, what is preferred, what to prioritize. I think we've done a good job in this initiative at prioritizing immediate concerns and focusing on setting the groundwork for more holistic conversations. So I think that connects very well with, as we start thinking about BCR, DEBs, SOC bidding, what are elements that we think could be better addressed by spending a bit more time developing this model now rather than fixing and then redoing. So that will be a trade-off to think. And yes, we'll prepare a whole refresh and update on this for our upcoming meetings. Thank you, Alva.
Thank you. I expect there might be other questions, but I want to, just as a counterpoint, I want to present my last slide and then maybe we can open it up. Because I also have some ideas for, could the NGR model be used? And this gets to Sergio's question of what's the near term versus far term. Are there tweaks that could be done to the NGR model that would allow it to be robust for concerns that are existing now? One possibility is bidding in real-time ramp rates. So just essentially constraining the original CAISO bid model allowed for operating ramp rates to be bid, and I believe that it's no longer possible even for thermal resources. I'm not positive about that, but I know that was with MRTU that capability existed. That I think it was removed, but still worth considering whether one possibility is that you simply change the ramp rate in your bid, or if you're close to maximum and minimum state of charge, to constrain dispatches to a lower ramp rate. Another possibility is that in the NGR model itself, you offer a state model where you're, rather than going continuously from Pmin to Pmax, you offer a charge-discharge state model. Now, that's clearly not something everybody would want, but there might be cases in which this would address some of the concerns that have been raised today. For example, with a charge-discharge state model, you could separate out the mitigation of the charge bid from the discharge bid without violating the monotonicity. So a similar, I mean, basically adding integer variables to the model could address some of these issues. Another one that is, and this has been proposed by others, is leverage the MSG model to incorporate foldback ranges. So essentially put in an additional state, which is not an economically attractive, and so it works properly in the optimization, both for the minimum state of charge and the maximum state of charge. Essentially, it only gets you only move into that state when you've run out of state of charge that is applicable to the non-foldback range of the battery. So those are possibilities in terms of the market model. Another going in the exact opposite direction, the NGR model could continue to be used, but you could move in the direction sort of what I was taking Don to say, and I don't think he was actually saying this, but it's a thought I've had, is that, translate the day-ahead results into something that really can be implemented physically. For example, consider initial SOC. If the market participant bids initial SOC, consider that a binding real-time target SOC. And if the market participant doesn't want to take the risk of setting that value and being driven to it, then let the CAISO provide a value which the CAISO will drive to, but without endangering your bid cost recovery. So if you are at the same initial SOC in real time as in day ahead, then at least in theory, which is not a very meaningful expression, but on some level you can conform to your day ahead awards with much lower risk of violating your state of charge constraints. And connected with this, and this gets to some ideas that Kathleen Colbert has raised. I don't think it's exactly the same idea, but what about the possibility of requiring CAISO to true up reg energy on some at some granularity? So if the CAISO says that the attenuation factor is 50% on reg down, and the actual take has been 35%, then at some point, whether it's in the current interval or the next interval, charge for that additional 15% and actually drive the solution to where the attenuation factors are stating the solution is going to be. So essentially turn those estimates of what your state of charge is going to be due to regulation into reliable values. And so those are approaches you take if you want the CAISO to drive to something that is entirely consistent with the day ahead awards. So those are just some thoughts I had, and I realize these are kind of outside of the box, but welcome comments at this point. This is really all I had to present.
If there's any comments or any hands at the moment. Is this do you still have a couple more slides here?
Well, let's see. I just wanted to say that, and this is echoing what Sergio was saying, that my assumptions in terms, especially in terms of the two models, even the NGR model changes, is that these are not going to be possible until, so the NGR model changes, conceivably, you could say, well, it's incremental 2027. A biddable SOC model, we have to expect that we're talking 2028. And then the questions, is going to be, what do you want to do in the meantime? But I think we have to allow for significant software development and market participant testing to enable implementation of these modified battery models. So that is my last slide. I had one more, but it's about the envelope constraints, and I decided not to present it just because it was more just expressing some doubts about the envelope constraints that I don't think are really relevant to this initiative. They might be relevant at some future point in time.
Okay, thank you so much for your presentation, Ala. And we're a little bit into our lunch time. I'm going to go back to our agenda slide just so we can take a look at when we're going to come back. So we are still going to take the lunch break only until 1 p.m. And then we're going to come back to Dinesh's presentation after that. So
Thanks
we
very
will
much.
be on lunch. And yeah, thank you for all the morning participation, and thank you for presenting and sharing in the discussion.
Okay, great. Welcome back, everyone. Hope everyone had a wonderful lunch. I will be moving forward and presenting the, oh, actually, Ahmed, do I have control over the slide deck right now?
You do have presenting rights.
Okay. Interesting. Okay. Do you mind moving? Let's see. Okay. Is this moving for you now?
Yeah, we're seeing
Yes.
page 29.
Perfect. Awesome. Thank you very much. So today I'm going to go over some of the comments we received, the written comments we received on the SOC Management and Capacity Awards topic, otherwise known as the Flexible Ramping Product topic. So today, the purpose of today is to make sure that we summarize and collect all the thoughts that we've been having over the last month and a half on this topic, and such that we can move forward and take these thoughts forward as we discuss a longer-term solution for this topic. Just to give an overview of where we're at. So the basic premise for the problem statement is that the current state of charge formulation does not consider the impact of FRP, flexible ramping product. And this is both for flexible ramping product, flexible ramp up and flexible ramp down. And due to this, the ISO has seen instances of inadequate state of charge for flexible ramp product awards, meaning that these awards that the market gives out and that is being paid for would not be deliverable if they were called upon to provide that the flexible ramping capability. The other problem here is that a large share of flexible ramping product is procured from storage resources, right? So we've got this combination of both a gap in the market design and also the fact that this specifically the storage resources are awarded the majority of the fleet. So this impacts price formation, market efficiency, and also there are reliability concerns from this. So, for example, first off, since the flexible ramping product awards are not limited by the impact on the SOC, the state of charge, this may mean that there are more resources offering the ability to provide flexible ramping product than actually can do so. And since there's more supply, especially at zero or close to zero prices, the concern is that price is artificially suppressed. And by artificially suppressing that price, other resources that may be able to provide flexible ramping product, if they were given more heads up, further notice, they are not called on to dispatch, such that storage is called on to dispatch and provided the awards. But if they can't meet them in the end, then we end up in the situation where it pushes pressure on the bid stack for energy, directly for energy. And this may put upwards pressure in the real time, potentially increasing energy prices. We have, in previous presentations, we have given more data, more analysis, and more information on this topic. If this is something that if you'd like to get a refresher on, or something that you're very interested in, I would highly recommend going back and reviewing those as well. So what have we done so far? So the ISO has proposed modifications to the Market Ops BPM through proposed revision request 1627. Specifically, the ISO has said that we'd like to ensure that the impacts of uncertainty awards in the upwards direction are considered in that SOC AT formula first, due to the fact that it's easier to sort of derate or to bump down certain resources than it is to ask for more at the last minute. So in some ways, we view the flexible ramping up product as something that is a reliability concern that we need to take into account as soon as possible and going into this summer. So as you can see here in the proposed modification, that term, that FRU IT term that's added right at the beginning of that second line, that is the proposed modification that we put in for the BPM. And since then, we've had a number of conversations about this. We have been going above and beyond in terms of making sure that we get the transparency, making sure that we get the stakeholder feedback that we believe is necessary, important, and really appreciated. And you know, we've heard a lot of discussion, and it's definitely putting us in a great place moving forward to developing a long-term solution. So the purpose of that BPM modification is to provide a solution that is achievable by summer, and also ensures that we can keep storage assets in providing flexible ramping products, specifically flexible ramping up, while ensuring that we also, the ISO meets the needs and the reliability of the product that we need going into this summer. So what do we expect these changes to do? We expect these changes to bolster the flexible ramp up price, leading to alternative resource dispatch. In the May 9th meeting, we went over some testing results, looking at an interval from the previous summer and comparing what happened to what would happen if we had put the modification in place. And what we found was that the flexible ramping upward price increased, and it also led to, in that specific interval, 16 additional resources that were dispatched that were given flexible ramp up awards that otherwise would not have been given those awards. So these proposed modifications would therefore increase operational certainty because we know that whatever awards are going out, we have certainty that they will be feasible and they will meet the awards if dispatched. So therefore, it preserves our reliability and also reduces the need for operators to rely on load bias if there's some sort of risk or thought that that the flexible ramping up product would not deliver. So we have also committed to further discussions to ensure efficient and feasible storage flexible ramping product. This is both for up and down, and we are looking forward to continued discussions both this summer and going beyond summer 2025. A summary of what we've done so far. You know, early on we heard that stakeholders had interest in this topic and wanted to have continued discussions and wanted to provide continued feedback via written comments on both the modification and the topic as a whole. So far, we had a policy call on the 14th of April where we first were where we, you know, it was an additional call to the BPM call to make sure that we were hearing stakeholders and getting all the perspectives that would be necessary here. So we accepted written feedback on that April 14th call. Then we also continued discussions at the May 9th call, where we introduced testing results. And then we've also accepted, in the BPM change management process, we have accepted comments on the PRR, and we also answered questions yesterday at the BPM change management meeting, specifically about that BPM change to adding flexible ramp up into the SOC-AT formula. Okay, so the next few slides, what we'll do here is summarize some of the new points that we've been hearing in those written comments, making sure that we're capturing that feedback and taking it forward for further discussions. So first off, we had stakeholders ask for further clarity on the expected outcomes of the modification. Particularly one was, what are the impacts to ancillary services more broadly, and flexible ramping product, and are we expecting to see a decrease in the amount of both of these categories in terms of awards for storage resources? And the ISO currently sees this as ancillary services. We do not expect to see a decrease in awards for ancillary services to storage resources. We do expect to see a decrease in awards of flexible ramp up to storage resources, specifically targeted at what otherwise would have been flexible ramp up awards that would not have been deliverable. And then another question that we received is whether this modification fully addresses the issue. Now, one of the things is how do you define what the issue is? So do we expect that this modification fully addresses the targeted situation we have where we are concerned about infeasible flexible ramp up awards due to lack of state of charge? Yes. Are there other issues with FRP and potential other consequences to, for example, flexible ramp down from this modification? We believe so. So while this modification addresses that narrow issue that we have identified, the ISO continues to work on the flexible ramping product and continues to seek ways to enhance both flexible ramp up and flexible ramp down. There was, for example, even yesterday, there was another BPM PRR related to flexible ramping product. That is a modification that we has been put on hold due to other contingencies that it's related to. But the point is that the ISO continually works on this, and the ISO also fully appreciates the feedback that we receive from stakeholders and take it very seriously. So moving on to the next bullet. So stakeholders asked for insight on the consequences awardees face when their awards cannot be met due to insufficient SOC. This is a great question. This is something, so the question is also whether, if a stakeholder gets an award and that cannot be met, are they still getting paid? These are questions that we will, first off, the idea is that we don't give awards out for something that is infeasible, right? So hopefully with the modification, we reduce the number of awards for flexible ramp up that are infeasible. Ideally, it takes us to 0. However, when looking into insights about consequences on awards that cannot be met, this is something that the ISO staff will take back and will provide a detailed level set in our next conversation about this topic. Great question. So then other stakeholders asked about the ISO to monitor for any adverse energy storage market outcomes because of the modification. This is something that, yes, we agree. This is something that we are definitely committing to and are also interested to make sure that there are no adverse outcomes, or if there are adverse outcomes, that they're mitigated as to the extent possible. The ISO seeks to provide regular updates on this. Ideally, we're targeting providing monthly updates, both in future storage design and modeling enhancements or meetings, this initiative meetings, and also the quarterly market performance forums. So, okay, moving on to the next slide. Okay, so we had further discussion or further requests for discussion on why both flexible ramp up and flexible ramp down cannot be included in the SOC constraint with attenuation factors immediately. This is a great question. This is something that we've been discussing over the last couple of meetings as well. And one of the concerns that the ISO has here is that we need to ensure, ideally, we ensure that both flexible ramp up and flexible ramp down is deliverable, is reliable, and you know, a product that we can trust. Right? That being said, why can't we do both flexible ramp up and flexible ramp down in the same constraint? One concern is that they would, by putting them in the same spot, they would counteract each other, right? So instead of ending up with one of them working, instead of neither of them working in terms of and covering that gap, we'd end up with the two of them essentially canceling each other out in a market optimization such that it wouldn't address the issue for flexible ramping up. Other sort of solutions. So one example is you know what Alvar had brought up, or Alvar from PG&E had brought up earlier today, and other thoughts about using potentially using Dane's envelope equations as a basis. These types of methods would take longer to implement, and it's something that we did not see that we could do by this summer. Then moving on to the next bullet. So stakeholders have requested additional information regarding why the ASSOC constraint was unable to prevent awarding flexible ramp product to storage resources with insufficient SOC. So this is also a really great question. This is something that we also, the ISO staff will take this question back and provide a more detailed level set at a future meeting. The high level answer to this question is that even though the ASSOC constraint does include flexible ramping product, the actual modeling doesn't include that flexible ramping product constraint. But this is a great question. This, you know, in exploring this question, this will also provide a great level set on both the ASSOC topic and also the flexible ramping product that will be, I believe, will be valuable for the stakeholder community. And then finally, stakeholders called for the ISO to pursue a durable solution following summer 2025. We received a request. From stakeholders to also explore a potential sunset date. That's something that we're not committing to at this point, but this is something that we are committing to pursuing a durable solution. Okay. Sergio, did you want to add something here quickly?
Yes, I can add a little bit here. On the second bullet here, what I would say is, you know, the ASSOC constraint does include FRP. The challenge, though, is that the SOC formula did not. So we had one part of the concern covered, but not all of them. with now this new modification, our testing reveals that we'll have better conditions regarding FRU procurement and pricing, and future enhancements will bolster that even further, hopefully. And then on the last point, on pursuing a durable solution following summer, we agree to, the continued discussion of this matter. I think that we'll need to, as a community here with the stakeholders, also recognize that there is a storage interplay for sure, but there's also there are also potentially broader questions about the design and enhancement of FRP as a product. So we'll need to be careful as to properly determine the scope and consider if other discussions in other venues will also be beneficial. And then finally, on the requests or comments we got related to a sunset date, as you mentioned, Dinesh, we understand that stakeholders want us to work on these challenges expeditiously, and we will. But we just don't think that a sunset date is conducive for the type of discussions and holistic design that this requires, particularly when we think about its interplay in the future with DAME and its potential leveraging of the envelope equation paradigm. That might merit, longer discussion, testing, data sharing with market participants, with stakeholders through here to understand the effects and options that would not be possible with a sunset date looming over us, right? It's interesting because we want to move fast, of course, but we also want to have a process that is stakeholder-led, and we also want to make sure that our solutions are not quick fixes, right? A sunset date does not serve any of those goals, I would say. So that's something that I wanted to share with you all. This is not a representation of our a lack of commitment to a durable solution beyond summer. I think it's actually a proof of it, that we want to take the time to pursue this and discuss it correctly. And I know you'll probably go to that slide further, but there is already some, let's say, stakeholder straw proposal in a way that has been put out there to enable some thinking on it. So, we welcome that, and I think as you can tell, it's not so dissimilar from the path of envelope constraints in general. But yeah, that's all I wanted to add. Thank you, Dinesh.
Thank you, Sergio. And then, just moving on to discussing this was a suggestion that PG&E has provided via their written comments. We had discussed it a little bit earlier today. I think this is something that we would like to think about a little bit more. Also hear feedback from everyone else about what they think about this approach, which is essentially to constrain total flexible FRP procurement in each period to feasible SOC limits, right? So one of the concerns that was brought up in prior comments, specifically by PG&E, but also by other entities as well, was that the current solution that we're putting in may constrain storage resources in future intervals, right? Because the modification effectively stacks across intervals, when instead it should actually just reset after every interval. And, on the flip side, this is also something that PG&E had mentioned, right, and that the ISO agrees with, right? We receive telemetry, right? So the telemetry that comes every 5 minutes, every 15 minutes, that also will reset that and prevent the stacking, right? Such that, it limits this. I think Alva referred to it as, earlier today, sometimes there are things that we see in theory, and whether they turn out to be niche or whether they turn out to be major concerns is something that, market data will help us discuss and analyze and ensure that we are building the best market we can possibly build. So I think that I'm going to leave this here for now. Moving back to the other comments that we heard from the BPM change management side, in terms of the comments that we received from stakeholders. We received requests on monitoring and reporting results of this modification. So the ISO is committing to reporting monthly results via the storage design and modeling meetings, this initiative meetings, and also the quarterly market performance and planning forums. So we will try to be as transparent and as forthright as we can about how the modification is doing, how our monitoring is going, and ensuring that both us and the community have full transparency on what's happening with this BPM change. So with that, we had, as discussed at the beginning of this call, this topic, the SOC management for capacity awards topic, is something that we will continuously be discussing at further meetings, where it will be an active topic that we will have a bit of time carved out so that we can keep on discussing and making sure that we're all aligned. And that any questions that they come up, we can address them as soon as possible. So that's all been calendared in now, and that's something that will be reflected going forward. Okay, great. With that, any questions? We're also nearing the end of the call, so actually, let's take questions on this first, and then if there are other questions, we can take those as well.
Not seeing any hands.
Okay, cool. Oh, there's a hand.
Oh, Alva. Yeah, let's go to Alva.
Keep the conversation going. I have one. Is it possible that you'll do something with respect to flexible ramping down sooner, or is it just considered because it seems like there's an interaction between not enforcing it for flexible ramping down that could, lead to unforeseen consequences. Not so much that you're seeing the same phenomenon in the other direction, but it seems like that might be something you would address sooner than a comprehensive solution. Have you considered that?
I could chime in here, Dinesh.
Okay.
I'd say that's definitely within the realm of something we'd consider. We do want the monitoring of the current solution to give us some indication as well. So, we're targeting to activate the solution described in PRR 1627 in the next couple of weeks, over the next 2 weeks, and that will allow us to start tracking its impact and its consequences if we find as well, the potential need to act on this FRD matter sooner than developing a whole holistic future solution. That's something we can consider as well. Thank you.
Great, thanks. And the only other thought I had, based on what Sergio had said yesterday, is it's also, hopefully you'll look at the possibility of different, apparently it's not a yes or no, or on or off flag. So potentially intermediate values might be also give better results as you're monitoring what, how far, how strictly you need to enforce this. So just another, hopefully another thing you'll be tracking is whether you've essentially overcorrected and could find some intermediate point where, you set the value to 50% or something like that.
Yes, I think the tracking will give us some insight on that matter as well. I would just note, at this time, we are thinking of this as we'd rather ensure the reservation of that SOC for this matter, for this purpose of the FRP, of the FRU specifically. It's a bit different how we've been thinking about this currently as to, for example, regulation, right? Where we're here, we prefer, at least in this summer, to err on the side of reserving the totality of the award. Now, to the degree that reporting and monitoring can inform a change there, we might consider it, but I think that really much so relates to the actual question of do we want to protect this as much or equally as we protect energy? What does that mean from a policy perspective, right? So it's partly data, but also partly an actual, almost philosophical discussion of if this is deferred energy or if this is ramping capability, at the end of the day, how do we want to protect it? To what degree do we believe it merits that reservation of it? But that's all I have to say at this time. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and that makes some sense because the only situation where this actually happens, it's interesting that happens so often, but the only place this happens is when a battery is essentially at its minimum. That could be a minimum based on having some services it has to protect or whatever, but it's essentially at from the perspective of the real-time market, it has no available state of charge if it cannot provide the constraint becomes binding when there is less state of charge than will support the full award. And so maybe you're right that the idea of changing the parameter to 50% isn't going to make any sense. You want to protect the entire amount of flexible ramping you're procuring because you want it to be exactly equivalent to the energy you could have procured in the current interval as well.
Yeah, and one other point to add too is that this is also for awards going into it, right? So there are other resources that may be able to step in and provide flexible ramp up instead of storage resources. However, they need to be given a little bit more time than storage resources because we know storage resources are very fast and very flexible, right? So in some ways, by being conservative on the front of flexible ramp up front, right, it allows us to ensure that given that we know that there are other resources that can meet it, that's where in some ways it's better to lean on the conservative side, right? Instead of under allowing that risk to be there and then finding that it's not there.
That makes sense. One other question: does this constraint show up in the HASP process, or is it only in the FMM and RTD?
So my understanding is that this is really in the not in the HASP process, but a 15-minute solve part of the FRP. I'll pause here to see if any of my colleagues would like to correct me there, because I might need that correction. But in any case, I can confirm and shoot you a note, Alva.
Okay, thank you.
One other thing to add, Albert, about timelining, right? So we're looking to have this in and sort of active within the next 2 weeks. So our next call, unfortunately, that means that we probably will not have data for the next NPPF, that Market Planning and Performance Forum. However, we hope to have, we might be able to have something ready by that June 30th call. Then the next call after that would be August 6th, where we will definitely have some sort of monitoring, some sort of analytics to share and discuss.
Great.
Okay. Thanks, Alva, for those questions.
Hi, this is
anybody
Quinn.
else?
Sorry for interrupting. This is Quinn. Just a quick correction on the previous answers. HASP is one of, it's RTPD 7 is one of the RTPD FMM runs, so this change will be applied in the HASP run as well.
Thank you for the correction. Sorry about that.
Thank you for that, Quinn. Okay. All right.
Great. I think I don't see yet. Go for it, Yelena. Thank you very much. Take us to the finish.
Thanks, Dinesh. And feel free to still raise your hand or put a question in the chat and we can still answer. So for next steps, Friday or possibly Monday, we're going to be posting the discussion paper on the distribution level and paired resources, as we mentioned. And the comments for today's meeting are due on June 11th. We'll get that comment template posted shortly. And then on June 30th is going to be that next meeting for the Uplift and Deb SOC management, distribution level, and paired resources, and as well as the posting for the revised straw proposal on outage management. For reference, we have some links here, and in an effort to help you stay engaged in the various ISO initiatives, here's a list of key events occurring this week. And this is available to you here and on the initiative webpage. And just as a final announcement, for insights into the ISO grid and market operations, be on the lookout for our Energy Matters blog, and you can always subscribe to this as well. And with that, I'd like to thank you for joining today's discussion. As a reminder, this meeting was recorded for informational and convenience purposes only. The video file will be posted to the initiative webpage, hopefully by the end of the week, and if not, early next week. And you can get there from the Stakeholder Center from our website. Thank you so much for joining the discussion and making it a robust discussion today. And thank you again, Alva, for your presentation. Have a good rest of your day.
Don, did you have a quick question? Yeah. Don, did you have a quick question before we went?
I just have a request. By chance, could you guys publish like an agenda a week in advance of each of the stakeholder meetings so we know the exact topics that are going to be discussed? I just think that would be beneficial.
In the notice for this meeting, we did have which two of the three topics were going to be covered, and we'll do that for the next ones as well, where they're broken down into these kind of tracks.
I think I was asking something different than the tracks in terms of what's actually going to be discussed, because like for the outage, for the Uplift and Deb, we discussed mitigation of charging bids. That's what I'm looking. If I look at the agenda for today, it was review the comments on from the 23rd. It was to look at the charging bids, charging mitigation. It was to Alva's presentation on his thoughts, and then I just think that would be beneficial. Because like I said, I was going on the fly. I didn't know what was actually going to be talked about until I saw the presentation.
We can do that. The practice is to post the presentation a week ahead of the meeting, and that includes the agenda, but we can call it out within that presentation posting as well. Is that?
Yeah, Sergio, so
the-
we usually, any presentation that we're posting is 2 days ahead. And I'm not sure if, we could take this back and see if we can post more of an agenda. Yeah, we usually post the presentation 2 business days ahead, and anything that is a paper and the notice goes out at least a week ahead. Yeah, so if we know ahead of time, then we can look at that and post something. Yeah.
Does the presentation work then, Son? Maybe that's really where we put the agenda.
Well, I'm not trying to force you to be completed with your presentation a week before the meeting. I just think it would be good to have the agenda in the market notice, for example. And more detailed in which of the 3 scope categories or 4 scope areas we're going to talk about.
Okay. Noted. Thank you very much, Don. We really appreciate your feedback and your contributions today.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
This event has concluded. Thank you for using Event Services. You may now disconnect.